This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Minutes after 10 is the time. I didn't have this job when we were preparing to go to war in Iraq. When George W. Bush was assembling a coalition, it wasn't a complete success, was it? European allies, fellow members of the European Union, adopting completely different approaches to that. I wonder whether anyone would dispute that the French probably got it right on that front. I didn't have this job, so I don't have the sort of full palette of recollection. I don't know, and in fact my memory wouldn't be good enough to know whether or not, if we do a phone-in today, if we have a conversation together today about the mood, the noise, the tone of coverage of the Israel-Iran, the current Israel-Iran conflict, whether or not you would hear echoes of conversations about US-Iraq from back in the day. I think I can hear some now. I think I can. I mean, certainly the very simple prospect of the United States going all in behind Israel would feel very much like the events of 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was called. The plan to remove Saddam Hussein's regime and address concerns about weapons of mass destruction. Donald Trump talking today about potentially removing the Ayatollah and weapons of mass destruction. In this case, nuclear weapons, which, as you know, if you listen to this programme, but you may not if you don't, or you haven't lately, you've been relying upon other outlets for your information. Benjamin Netanyahu personally has been claiming that Iran was on the brink of creating a nuclear bomb since 1992. And it doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth this time. It just means that he's got it wrong on countless occasions in the past. And, I mean, speaking of déjà vu, it's a little bit like Gaza already as well, isn't it? In that the conversation about the nuclear capability already seems to be in retreat. Happened very slowly in Gaza. I think the world was still primed slightly differently. You didn't have Donald Trump in the White House, most obviously. So Israel's insistence that it was interested only in punishing or eradicating Hamas and rescuing hostages held for quite a long time, even as the carnage they were inflicting on entirely innocent civilians began to rack up. An awful lot of effort, of course, put into telling you that you shouldn't believe the statistics, and of course enormous amounts of effort put into preventing journalists from Western news organisations to get in there to either check for themselves or send back pictures of what was actually happening, because most of us can still trust the evidence of our eyes and ears despite the effort put into dissuading us. But that has happened very quickly this time. Very little of the coverage this morning focuses upon the nuclear capability that was the original rationale for the attack. Issuing instructions to everybody in Tehran to get the hell out, making it clear perhaps that this is about destruction of as much as possible, as opposed to simply the removal of a mooted, shall we say, nuclear threat. No proof whatsoever that it is real, and indeed some grounds to believe that it is not. All of the inspections, all of the available evidence suggests not just that we can't prove that the nuclear capability is there, but worse, it suggests that the nuclear capability isn't any more than it was in 1992 or 2002 or 2012 or 10 past 2 yesterday or a year ago or the year before that. So this is the bit that I think speaks to the feeling of repetition. You've got Trump demanding an unconditional surrender by Iran. What does that even mean? You're under concerted attack from a neighbour, not unprovoked, because of course Iran has attacked Israel in the recent past. But in the context of the most recent events, the rationale seems to be that you're blowing up your neighbour's house because he might get a gun one day, and that. I suppose if you really stretch the terms of self-defence, you might just about be able to claim that is self-defence. But in the absence of evidence, and I keep coming back to that because That's what happened in Iraq. That they said, and they were believed, that weapons of mass destruction could be turned upon us at any point. Do you remember that? Not just that it was a weapon that could be turned upon Israel. Iraq, Saddam Hussein was in possession of weapons that could be directed at us, that could be fired at the West. You may have forgotten some of the detail. But you'd think they'd be able to provide the proof, given the extent of the... In fact, when you look at what Trump has said lately, we know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is. I find myself having to double down and stress to you, this is real. This is the President of the United States of America. This is not a parody account or a Saturday Night Live skit or a hoax or somebody who's very cleverly put together something on social media that looks official but isn't. This is the real deal. This is the man who, of course, promised that there'd be no new wars on his watch. And he has posted this in the last few hours. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, brackets, kill, exclamation mark, close brackets, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter, exclamation mark. Just to digress slightly, I want to do a phone-in on why he keeps putting thank you to your attention to this matter at the end of his post. I've got all sorts of theories about this. I think he thinks it makes him sound like a grown-up. I think, and I suspect that some of his fans, it makes them feel like they're somehow part of... Thank you for your attention to this matter. It makes them feel like they're in the room where it happens. Or there could be another reason. But it's absolutely pathetic. Thank you for your attention to this matter on a bloody tweet or whatever you call posts on social media. It's extraordinary, but it's far from the most extraordinary thing about this message, because if they possess the technology to know exactly where the Ayatollah is hiding, you'd think they'd be able to establish whether or not Iran is upon the brink of producing a nuclear bomb. Look, call me, I don't know, call me what you want. Call me Al. You can call me Al. But if your intelligence operation is so complete and so impressive that you can actually claim to know, and presumably do know, where the Ayatollah is hiding, where the supreme leader is hiding, then you probably could find a whopping great nuclear bomb in the same territory, right? I don't know. Maybe they're tiny these days. Maybe the facilities that you need to create a nuclear bomb are a fraction of the size of one human being, of one Ayatollah. But I don't... And again, you know, I say this stuff and I think, as it comes out of my mouth, that it's blindingly obvious. But maybe there's something I don't understand here. Maybe it's all buried in an enormous hole, in which case you'd wonder, why isn't the Ayatollah hiding there? So you've got a bomb and you've got a bloke, right? They know exactly where the bloke is, but they can't show you the bomb. Which means that the bloke is very stupid, because if he really wants to hide from them, he'd be hiding where the bomb is. Unless there is no bomb. In which case there's no justification for these attacks, which is very similar to what happened in 2003. And we all know how that ended. Pick your favourite. ISIS, maybe? Absolute carnage, chaos in Iraq. And the rationale I had at the time was so wrong. My rationale at the time, and this is me being very honest with you because I didn't have this job, so I don't have to admit it, but my rationale at the time was, if you've got 10 murderous despots lined up against the wall and you've only got one bullet, what are you going to do? So there was a lot of whataboutery, which looks a lot more valid now than it did to me back then. And it would say, why are we going after Saddam Hussein when, for example, the 9/11 bombers were mostly Saudi Arabian? It's actually a very good question. Unfortunately, the answer is pretty flippin' obvious. Why are we going after Saddam Hussein and not going after, and then insert your sort of despotic regime of choice at this point? And rather than actually trying to work out proper answers to those questions, which is what I would do now in your company and what we will do today with whatever questions we end up asking, rather than trying to actually answer those questions, I came up with this slightly crass gimmick. If you've got one bullet, maybe I nicked it off someone else. I don't know. Maybe this is what the government was touting at the time, or what George W. Bush was suggesting. You've only got one bullet and you've got 10 murderous dictators lined up against the wall. What are you going to do? Of course you're going to shoot one. Well, then, of course, you've got no bullets. Strange, right? So, how... Is that the question we should ask? I mean, is this all beginning to look very 2003? With a side order of Gaza, actually. with a side order of claiming originally that you have to do this in order to do that, you have to do this in order to achieve that, you have to do X in order to achieve Y. But then once the die has rolled or the clock has ticked or the page has turned, you're still doing X, and you're no longer claiming that the intention is to achieve Y. 50-odd thousand people dead. And no one really talks anymore about the rationale for the war being to destroy Hamas or rescue the hostages. Something that the hostages' families stopped believing a long time ago. So, I mean, is this the question, do you think? Have we learned nothing? Have we learned nothing? 03456060973 is the number that we need. I'm 53 years old, so I was 30. Was I 30? No, I wasn't. In 2003, 22 years. Yeah, I was about 30, give or take. And I just started being paid for my opinions. But I didn't really have the knowledge that I needed on this because I didn't know who to trust. Lots of people said there aren't any weapons of mass destruction, but there must have been at some point because we know that Saddam Hussein had used them against his own people. And yet, I've got the name Hans Blix bobbing around in my brain, who was the United Nations weapons inspector, but I'm afraid I can't completely recall his relevance to the conversation. But that's what we do, isn't it, in the West? We justify attacks upon the East, upon the Middle East. And in a sense, Israel is a Western country in the context of this observation, not geographically, but geopolitically. It's not just the Eurovision Song Contest. I think that the point extends a little further than that. You have this sense that they soften the public up for war, the American public. I think it would be less successful this time round with the British public, but who knows? You soften the public up for war by positing an epic threat, either to an ally or to yourselves. The weapons of mass destruction, I am 99% sure, were described as being aimed at us. I've got the idea that there was a 20-minute claim at some point. That's not happening here. But the idea that the nuclear bomb that Iran is in possession of, or will imminently be in possession of, but which nobody could prove, is the reason why Iran is now facing the kind of obliteration that Gaza has endured. Or why, depending on which story you want to focus on first, why Donald Trump is considering joining forces with Israel, or why the residents of Tehran have been instructed to get out, or why Trump is demanding an unconditional surrender, or why the traffic coming out of Tehran is now stretching for miles as thousands flee, or why rescuers are currently sifting through the remains of a residential area of the city, or why the state broadcaster has been hit. How does hitting, unless they're hiding a bomb in the studio, why are they attacking the state broadcaster? And I don't know whether these questions are the right questions to be asking. I don't know whether you can answer that, actually, with a straight face. The reason why a mission to reduce or remove Iran's nuclear capability involves attacking the state broadcaster is ... Maybe there is an answer to that question. And maybe this headline is wrong. Destruction, not reform, is Netanyahu's ultimate goal. Israel, and this was an interview that he gave to Fox News, perhaps inevitably at the weekend, Israel would not simply dismantle Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, but usher in regime change in Tehran. And that's where perhaps the echoes of Saddam Hussein in 2003 become loudest. That's the question. Are we just doing the same thing again, or does this feel different to you? Very gratifying. Phone in on Monday. The cleverest question we asked by some distance was, what is life like in Iran in 2025? I don't think we could have done that in 2003 with regard to Iraq. I don't think I'd have got the calls. I don't even know whether you'd have been able to listen to me in Iraq if I'd been on the radio in 2003. Would there have been enough Iraqis here to conduct that conversation? Maybe there would. I don't know. But we probably wouldn't have had enough listeners in total. Well, we do now. Is this very, very similar? Is it beginning to look a lot like 2003? Or can you persuade me that it's not? Can you convince me that it was 45 minutes? You're absolutely right, Ray, not 20 minutes. It was the dodgy dossier, and there you go. It's not just me. Ray says, I was thinking exactly the same thing this morning. And actually, speaking of great minds, Lauren asks this question: when has regime change ever been to our benefit? I don't know, actually, is the answer to that. I nearly asked that question at the top of the show today. I was going to be specific to the Middle East. I was thinking most obviously of Afghanistan and Iraq, and then of Syria. But that was an organic regime change. That came from within, not from without. The arguments that we should have helped began to look a little... Well, I don't know. We don't need to overcomplicate the questions we're already asking. Is this beginning to look to you a lot like 2003, when, I think it's fair to say, I don't want to say warmongers or hawks, but the supporters of that war have been found rather wrong by history?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 10, and it is, I mean, it's been nearly 10 years now, hasn't it? The news has just seemed to be conspiring to keep us in business. So heavy and so hideous and so unrelenting. And now we're looking at a possibility of another all-out war, not my phrase, in the Middle East. Does it look to you a lot like the last one? Or are there grounds for grounds for disagreement? Let's crack on. You've heard more than enough from me. John's in Camden. John, what would you like to say?
Well, first, I'd like to commend you on your show, because this is providing a different viewpoint than when you listen to Sky or BBC.
Okay.
And I'm 62, and as you said, you're 53. I do remember 2003.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it is the same, because we had Tony Blair, a Labour Prime Minister, and now we've got Keir Starmer again, a Labour Prime Minister. And who would have thought that Labour would be the ones with the most warmongering?
Well, I don't think he's done much yet, Starmer, on this front. But I mean, yes, I mean, we shall see, won't we? Because that would be a big parallel if a Labour... I can't quite see Starmer going into lockstep with Trump if Trump decides to throw his full weight behind Israel at the moment. But talk to me about other parallels, if you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was the first one to announce that he's sending assets to the Middle East. And as you know, the RAF Akrotiri is being used at the moment for spying missions and for American bases. And if you looked at flight radar yesterday, there was a lot of activity over Britain from the 12 RAF bases. And they already, Ministry of Defense has admitted that it's sending resources to the region. So that's even before the country or parliament has even, voted on this or thought about this. So that's one thing. I mean, this very serious conversation. Can I just tell you something funny before you continue? Sure.
So I was in my garden on Saturday, and there was a sonic boom, and loads of military jets flew over my head, and my first thought was Iran. And then I remembered it was the King's birthday, and it was the fly past for Trooping the Colour.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But yesterday, there's a famous journalist called Matt Kennard. Maybe you get him on your show. He tracks all these things, and he's a proper journalist. He's not anybody, who just come up with this. But yeah, I hope it would only be for King's birthday, but it wasn't, unfortunately.
No, I hear you. Sorry, my attempt to make you smile clearly didn't work, which in the circumstances is well, there you go. I got a chuckle in the end. It's perfectly reasonable. So, I mean, Dr. David Kelly's name is appearing in my inbox. Of course, the idea that a threat is manufactured or exaggerated. I do, for the record, think that many people in the Labour government you've referred to, I think they honestly believed their own, whatever you want to call it, claims, propaganda. They honestly believed it, but a threat is manufactured to justify a regime change. And so far, that is what seems to be happening here. As someone of Iranian extraction, why is that such a bad thing, given that the regime has, many flaws?
Well, Chambre is the most hated prime minister, they say, in the UK, but it doesn't mean some country should attack this country to change him. Iranians should change him. I was condemned to death in 1994 by this regime in Iran, by this government in Iran. But that doesn't mean I want my country bombed to smithereens, and I want to have a the same thing that happened in Iraq. What happened in Iraq? When it's 2003, as you said correctly, now we are 22 years after that. Iraq still doesn't have electricity, it imports from Iran. It still doesn't have proper infrastructure. So what happened to all that rebuilding? Do we want in Iran? Iran recently opened the biggest mall in the world. It has shopping centers, it has hotels. It has problems, lots of problems, I agree. But what I'm saying is we don't want the country, because what happens if there's no military, if there is no police, all the structures collapse, what happens? Then you get
chaos
people
and the rise of radicals and extremists.
Ammunition, arms, and then you get instability, you get ISIS, you get Al-Qaeda, and the problem with Iran, you're going to have the same thing. And you asked a very correct question, that none of these regime change wars result in stability. They always result in crisis.
Well, I can't think of one. People are welcome to come up with suggestions, but I can't think of one. What were you sentenced to death for?
Sorry?
What were you sentenced to death for?
Because I was a student in London, and I was against the continuation of the Iran-Iraq war and whatever, so I got targeted. And things happened. But then, after the revolution, there was lots of hotheads in the government, there was lots of people, but it's changed, it's 47 years. And now, Iran elected a reformist president, and we want to negotiate. And the thing is, Iran has always said we want to have good relations with the West. But when, one of the things that I would like to point out is, like you pointed out earlier, if you dehumanize the other side, that's a way to get public support. Yeah?
Always.
And yesterday they had the Iranian ambassador in the Foreign Affairs Committee in Parliament. I don't know if you saw it or not. It was live on Sky and BBC. And they were attacking him, and they kept calling him regime, mullahs, ayatollahs. They sort of want to make them feel like these people are not worthy,
And you describe the regime in those ways, and somehow you almost, by a sort of process of osmosis, the entire population becomes dehumanized alongside them. A word, if you would, while I have you, on the line that is coming into the studio from people who very much fit into the category we described on Monday. Everything Israel ever does will always be justified. So here's David in Wembley, talking about me, not you, John. He says, you poor man, you really have lost your mind. Iran's stated aim is the destruction of Israel. And in David's mind, that justifies everything that Israel is currently doing. I know that Ahmadinejad back in his administration talked about the necessity of wiping Israel off the map, and it is very much the line I'm hearing from people who are in favour of everything that Israel is doing to Iran. How do you deal with that?
You're a rational person. If Iran, let's say, you believe these neocons, Iran has one nuclear bomb or 10, America has 7,000, Israel has 400, Pakistan has God knows how many. Do you think even if Iran had one, it would go and hit Israel with it? It would be suicide.
I mean, to me, that seems fairly self-evident. But we talked a lot about fig leaves in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack by Hamas, and how people who are in favour of inflicting epic and utterly unjustified carnage upon either Palestinians or, in this case, Iranians, they just need a fig leaf. They need to be handed something by the sort of gatekeepers that allows them to justify their own bloodlust by saying something like, Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. You've got no way of proving or disproving it, except, as you say, the likelihood of...
My uncle is in Iran now, in Tehran, His mother-in-law has got dementia and Parkinson's. They cannot move out of Tehran because she cannot be moved. And then you get this idiot Trump going on social media, leave Tehran. 12 million people, how are they going to leave Tehran?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't think about the human suffering of people there. And it's not like, not everybody in Iran supports the regime, but they also, they like to think we have our own government, we make our own decisions. 9 months ago, a year ago, the president's plane crashed on, helicopter. They chose another guy, and he's a reformist guy. He's a heart surgeon. He's an educated person. He said, we want to negotiate with the West. And they're negotiating for... But what I wanted to say that no media reported in England, 25th of May, Kemi Badenoch goes on TV and has an interview and says, this is a proxy war for Britain. Israel is fighting a proxy war for the UK. Yeah, you refer to Ahmadinejad saying that stupid thing. So why, so because Kemi Badenoch said this Israel is fighting for the UK, does that justify Iran then attacking the UK? No.
Yeah, well, I think one area in which...
It doesn't justify attacking a country, does it?
Well, no. I mean, I think probably one thing on which everybody can agree is that Kemi Badenoch has never intervened in any situation and made it better. But that if you, and I've got no reason to doubt your recollection, that would be an intervention of particularly epic stupidity. Thank you, John. And there it is. I mean, you can argue with a man who's been sentenced to death by previous incarnations of the Iranian regime about why it's wrong to destroy so much infrastructure in Iran, but I'm not sure I can this morning. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:33. I was deployed with the UK military in Iraq and Afghanistan. For the avoidance of doubt, I, James O'Brien, am reading this. I'm not opening up a previously undisclosed chapter of my memoirs. I was deployed with the UK military in Iraq and Afghanistan and assisted in UK operations in Libya and Syria. 4 misadventures into Middle Eastern regime changes that resulted in millions dead, the formation of ISIS, 2 10-year-long civil wars and the reinstatement of the Taliban. Removing a ruling power with no gameplay or understanding of the country's demographics will always result in even more despotic dictatorships filling the power vacuum. And I mean, that is why the sense of deja vu is perhaps so strong. Iran has 1 reactor which can only use uranium enriched to 5%, so ask yourself why they need to enrich past 60%, asks Andy in Edinburgh, which counterintuitively is 90% towards weapons grade. It can't be used for anything else. The French and Pakistan are complicit in providing the technology. Iran should take Russia's offer of taking the uranium off their hands, and that would leave Israel no excuse to continue the attacks. Israel, of course, is widely believed to be a nuclear power. I mean, if you're to ask why shouldn't Iran have a nuclear capability, you'd probably open a can of worms, but it's a deterrent. You have a nuclear capability to ensure that your enemies don't fire their nuclear bombs at you. And if you look at the map of the world, the idea of Israel firing a nuclear bomb at anyone in the Middle East, or indeed anyone in the Middle East firing a nuclear bomb at Israel, would appear to be absolutely bonkers. The only time it's happened in human history was when an American pressed the button thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from the bomb site. And speaking of matters aviation, obviously I didn't hear a sonic boom on Saturday. None of the planes that flew over Brentford broke the sound barrier, but I did find myself a little bit surprised. So I hadn't clocked the trooping of the colour. I just finished mowing the lawn, if you're interested. I was looking for my sprinkler, and don't dob me in. It's not a drought alert at the moment, is there? But anyway, and then loads of military planes started flying overhead. The point at which I realised this was not a precursor to an intervention in the Middle East was when something that looked very much like a Second World War bomber came into view, at which point I thought, this is a fly past. This is not a kind of warm-up exercise. 10:36 is the time. Adam is in Southwark. Adam, what made you pick up the phone?
Hey, how you doing, James? I think, actually, you just touched on a few of the things that made me pick up the phone. So it's really just about, why do we keep having this conversation about should Iran not have nuclear weapons? At the end of the day, we do, and we're the only side that's actually ever fired one. So why should the people who see themselves in affinity with those who were decimated by a lot of the things that our country has done around the world, not have the kind of nuclear deterrence as you just touched on, right? I mean, we all sort of... Well,
that ties in with John's point, and I don't have the knowledge or the qualifications to comment on this, but if you portray the administration in Iran, and for my money, whether I'm right or wrong, I'm going to tell you my honest opinion, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and other and some of the Ayatollahs have very much seemed to enforce this notion that the place is a theocracy, is a crazy, corrupt theocracy where you can never say with any confidence that they won't do crazy things. So you don't want crazy people to have a nuclear weapons program. North Korea does. You could come back and point out to me, but two massive wrongs or two massive crazies don't necessarily make a right.
Yeah, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. I suppose you could also look at it from the perspective that, however crazy we may perceive these people to be, they're not the ones who have been invading people around the region. They're not the people who have actually been at war through the majority of their history. We can make whatever sort of assessments that we want.
I mean, they have proxies. They've bankrolled terror organisations. They bankroll Hamas and Hezbollah. They offer support to organisations like that, but then so does Qatar, and they get to host a World Cup. So it's not exactly a world of consistent standards, is it?
Precisely, and I think that's the point, isn't it? Is that our perspective here might be, okay, this group is a terrorist organisation, that group is, but theirs is not the same perspective, right? And they're obviously a sovereign country who has the right to make that assessment. They see these as resistance groups, which is one perspective. I mean, even if we look back in history, we could see that Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist, and my mum remembers very well the way that he was portrayed on the
although Nelson Mandela never masterminded murderous attacks that left thousands of people dead. I mean, you're right in the terms of the politics and the rhetoric, but we have to be careful not to let our Venn diagrams get too big. So this looks to you like a repeat of various points in Western history, post-Second World War Western history, like a manufactured rationale for bringing about a regime change that will almost certainly leave the country, if it were to unfold, leave the relevant country worse off than it was before.
Yeah, I think it will leave the whole region and possibly the whole world worse off than it was before. I would say that actually even the weapons, the uranium enrichment, comes in the context of Iran being very sort of heavily involved in pharmaceuticals, right? So this kind of enrichment that we see from Iran doesn't appear to actually be weapons grade enrichment. It appears to be exactly on the line that Iran has always gone down, and to ask Iran to stop that completely is basically to...
Well, that's what the last treaty did, and it was Donald Trump, of course, who tore up the last treaty. I don't have the knowledge. Andy in Edinburgh making the point that there wouldn't be many other reasons, or any other reasons at all, why you'd want to achieve that level of enrichment if it wasn't for a weapon. But a phone-in on why does Israel have nuclear bombs? It might be something we can do in the not-too-distant future. It's there, isn't it? That question of it's a deterrent. It makes people think twice about attacking you. So, the question of why Iran might want one, as its capital city is being evacuated, becomes relatively easy to answer, doesn't it?
It does.
It's we're going to attack... I mean, listen, this is mad, right? Yeah. Because we're going to attack Iran because we claim, and we've been claiming since 1992, but please don't mention that they're about to actually achieve a nuclear capability. But, of course, the reason why we have nuclear bombs is to stop other people from attacking us.
Yeah, exactly.
Riddle me that.
And so that kind of, the question is portrayed by, the answer is portrayed by the question,
isn't
right?
It? Yeah.
Is that we are very much in that position of we want to hold all of the cards, and we want to be able to attack who we want when we want, and that has been our history, right?
And that is why. And as soon as you use the word "we," some of the pieces of the jigsaw slot into place in the context of both what happened in 2003 and what John suggested from Camden is likely to happen now. If I tell you something, do you promise not to laugh at me?
Go ahead, mate.
All right, I Googled perpetual war last night because I'd kind of forgotten exactly what it meant and exactly what the rationale behind it was. And of course, I was reminded of the various dystopias in which perpetual war becomes a necessary, most obviously, I suppose, 1984 becomes a necessary tool of a regime. And then I stumbled across a piece I'd missed at the time by Simon Tisdall, who argues very, very persuasively that this is what Netanyahu needs. He needs perpetual war, not just to sort of keep the home fires burning, but also to stay out of jail. He's the Observer's foreign affairs commentator, and Trump's, in his words, Simon Tisdall's words, Trump's simplistic zero-sum world makes it easier. And maybe that's what we're looking at in some ways. And many people have suggested this morning in my texts that this was as much to do with public relations or public perceptions as it was to do with imminent threats. And because Netanyahu has essentially lost the hearts and minds of previous supporters when it comes to his actions in Gaza, he's just shifted the focus all the way to Iran and talked about nuclear bombs and historic threats to wipe Israel off the map, and started bombing TV studios and residential areas and nuclear capabilities and taking out senior members of the administration. And he will get the support of, quotes, the West again, end quotes, just as it was beginning to teeter in the context of Gaza, perpetual war. And of course, the question of whether Israel ever intended to honour the ceasefire in the first place, that it broke most recently, is pretty close to rhetorical. Thank you, Adam. Joshua is in Wigan. Joshua, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James. Thanks for having me. The one thing that I don't think has been highlighted much when we're having these conversations, particularly in Western media, seems to be a lot of discussion talking about potential regime change within Iran, but we don't talk about much about potential regime change in Israel. We
do, you know. I don't want to jump in too quickly, but it's too late now. We do talk about how the only real prospect of the perpetual war ending would be for Benjamin Netanyahu to be defeated in an election. That's not normally a phrase that we'd apply regime change to, but an awful lot of the conversations we've had are contingent upon a change of leadership in Israel.
That's true, but you'll hear this from any sort of political leaders, or even sort of like strong political commentators. I can't point to any sort of political leaders currently in the UK that are pointing to regime change in Israel.
Okay, but it's a democracy.
Absolutely. I'm not turning around to say that we need to go to war with Israel. Absolutely not. As you said,
but you can't talk about regime change in a democracy, really.
Well, yeah, but I think the
what's your point? I don't want to badger you, but that seems to be a bit of a distraction. What's your central point?
Yeah, my central point is just to kind of, there needs to be more of a hard line, I think, for Israel's allies to turn around and say, we need to kind of hold back to what we're doing here. It's difficult to kind of justify the strikes that have gone into Iran today as preemptive defensive strikes.
Is it? Is it difficult?
I don't think
to
so.
justify?
Yeah. I think it is, because like you said before, like it is since 1992, Benjamin Netanyahu's made the claims that Israel's been on the cusp of nuclear weapons for a while, and this hasn't manifested. Not to say that this isn't what Israel's pursuing, and not to say that Israel is a good actor in any of this. But no, Iran. Iran is a good actor in any of this. But to kind of pretend as if Israel's completely acting just within self-defense in these measures, I think with these current strikes, this is less about self-defense, and this is more so about Netanyahu taking advantage of a situation of an America that's capitulated itself on the world stage, and an Iran that is significantly weaker after what has been a terrible year for them last year, after losing, proxies and a lot of instability on the home front too.
Just hit them while they're down, as it were. I do think, I should have mentioned that piece that Simon Tisdall wrote for The Observer was back in March. It was long before the latest attacks, when he was explaining why Netanyahu can never accept peace in Gaza. He literally wrote this, headline on a piece, written on March the 18th of this year. Netanyahu will never accept peace. Where will his perpetual war lead next? Almost shivers down the spine stuff, that. That is quality commentary, because that question was answered this weekend. 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:48, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A quick nod to that claim that the Iranian regime is dedicated to wiping Israel off the face of the earth, which some people use for good or for ill as a justification for killing as many as Iranians as necessary. And of course we're back to Gaza. What is necessary? Well, how much is too much? What is proportionate? What is disproportionate? And the kind of people who we have been not so much taking calls from latterly, but still get the odd text from, are perfectly comfortable with a no upper limit on the number of deaths. But the easiest one to find is nearly 20 years old, when the then president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was reported to have called for Israel to be wiped off the face of the earth. But that's, as I say, nearly 20 years ago. And even that was a subject of some dispute. So you've got Ahmadinejad being widely regarded as more extreme than both his predecessors and his successors. He's still in the game, but he's not in the big job. He's not president of Iran. And the only place where I could find that report also later issued the following clarification. The translation of the statement he made in 2005 at the World Without Zionism conference in Tehran has been the subject of dispute. A more literal translation is, the regime occupying Jerusalem must vanish from the page of time. And this is the translation we should have used. There may be, I'm not sure, but there may well be other examples of Iranian leadership using that rhetoric or using that kind of language. But it's odd that that's the only one that I could find in the first instance. As I say, I'll keep looking. And yet we know that in the last couple of years, members of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration have called for nuclear bombs to be dropped on Gaza. I literally called for it. So would that justify an invasion of Israel? Leah's in Fulham. Leah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm an Iranian. I lived in Iran until 14 years old and then moved to Dubai with my family. At 18, I moved to UK, studied, got my doctorate. Now I have a very successful tech company. And I believe, I'll just give you a background of myself. I'm Iranian and I traveled around. I believe this war could bring stability to the Middle East as Iranians, nation, and Israeli be friends and policing in the Middle East, so there is no more extremist in Middle East. That's what I believe, and I don't know. I might be very naive to think this way, but considering Iranians are not Arabs, considering most Iranians now are against the regime and in favor of regime change.
Can you think of an example from history of a country being bombed into stability?
But there are currently, as far as the news which I perceive from Iran, is that they are, bombing locations which are not all of them residentials. So majority of them, they're targeting their army leaders or people like the mullahs, basically, not civilians.
Well, they've called for an evacuation of Tehran.
Yes, because that's what I believe. They want to take over Tehran, and taking over Tehran with Israeli armies or with Americans, that could, gain power somehow and have the regime change.
Which brings me back to my original question. And just because we may not be able to think of one doesn't mean that the next one won't work. But can we think of examples from history, particularly in the Middle East, of regimes being bombed into stability?
Again, it's not being...
can we think of a war can we think of a war in the Middle East that has increased stability in the region?
I don't know. I have to look at the history. I don't know much about that. But this one could be different.
It could.
Considering, again, Iranians, they have different culture, different language. And I love Arabs, by the way. I lived with them. I have lots of friends, and there's nothing against them. But I'm just saying we are different. We have, when we were back in the school in Iran, we studied... we didn't even study that much of Arabic. When we were reading Quran, it was in Arabic, and we didn't know what we were saying, what we were reading. And we didn't get that, attached to the words we were reading. And most of my friends, anybody I know around me, they have denounced their religion, and they don't want to be part of it. What we see in the TV,
I'll ask you a question that I asked when in the early days of the attacks on Gaza. If we take your desire for regime change and your belief that it would bring stability, what would be a rough figure for the number of Iranians that you're prepared to see die in order to bring about what you desire?
So I have no desire for anyone to die. No one.
But it's not going to happen unless it's not going to happen unless they do. So what would be a rough estimate of what would be either acceptable or unacceptable to you? I can't comment on that. You kind of have to, I think. I mean, I'm not going to force you to, but I don't think you can be in favour of regime change without acknowledging that it will involve a lot of death of Iranians, of your fellow Iranians?
Yes, absolutely. I want them to be protected. I want them to be safe. But the Iranians regime has been killing them. They've been killing the Iranians. It's to millions, probably, if you want to go back since the regime change.
And that's why you come back. That's when we come back to the question of when regime change in these kind of contexts has actually brought about stability. Syria might actually answer your question, but of course that wasn't regime change that was imposed from outside. That was achieved from within. When Western powers or the allies of Western powers have gone into places and brought about regime change through force and through killing the people that live there, I'm not sure either of us can come up with an example of things going well.
Syria, we should not forget, it's been in war for many years, and they weakened Assad regime before this happened. So it is kind of they've been in war. It's not like just one day and change. They have changed the regime.
No, well, I know, except it wasn't imposed from the outside. It was achieved. It was achieved from within, which would be desirable in Iran. Well, we do know, and we also know that the bloke currently in charge used to be in ISIS. So some of the sort of lazy distinctions and observations get blown to pieces when you look at the Syrian example. But I find myself wondering quite where we would point in order to support the notion that this could be good for Iran. What example, what precedent we would cite. And I suppose you're perfectly entitled to say, well, I haven't got one, but it doesn't mean this won't work. And then you'd look at Gaza and think, really? You want to see you want to see a repeat of that? Because at the end, if it ever ends, when it ends, there will be stability, things will be better for Iran. Dilman's in Liverpool. Dilman, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, a bit nervous, but I think we repeat the history again. Things. I am one of those who was cheerleader when they take Saddam Hussein out. I'm a Kurdish Iraqi.
Okay.
And currently live in Liverpool.
I've got to interrupt you because I don't know why. I have such a fascination with accents generally, and I love nothing more than a hybrid accent. So I always think of Jan Molby, who probably and he was Danish, but with a distinct Scouse twang. After he'd spent I've never heard a Kurdish Scouser before, but your accent is a thing of beauty, mate.
I've got to say, I love it, and I'm married Scouse as well, so it's beneficial.
I'd like to thank you for making me giggle during a conversation as serious as this. But let's get back to it. So, what do you think we're watching today? What do you think we're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't speak for Iranian peoples. I get it because I've seen the other side where I was cheerleader of when they take Saddam Hussein down.
Yeah.
And I must admit, I regret what I was cheerleading.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people believed what they were told and therefore supported things that turned out to be unsupportable.
Well, yes, absolutely. Like, I mean, as I said again, I witnessed where Saddam Hussein was trying to kill people's kids, especially Kurdish, and we wanted the freedom of change the regime, but then again, the stabilities are just going absolutely badly. In fact, I've got Kurdish have their own government at the minute, but even worse than Saddam Hussein, they are currently operating the way Saddam Hussein operated, much worse, I believe.
Right. So that's the point, isn't it? These things generally create power vacuums, or you put a proxy regime in place, or you occupy the country that you have sought to change the regime of, and none of those things historically end well. I suppose glibly, Japan got bombed into stability at the end of the Second World War. You could argue that Germany got bombed into stability, but that's different. I mean, they were the aggressors. They started these wars, and so defeat is defence and defence is defeat. I don't know that anybody calling for regime change in Iran is thinking about what would happen next. And that's where we come back to Iraq.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very hard to tell. Iranian people deserve have a better, especially women again, have a better respect in what they believe and what they're capable of, what women do. Then again, At the other side, we've seen in Iraq Syria that the ISIS and...
Well, that's it, isn't it? And it's as if the only thing we ever learn from history is that we never learn anything from history. Yeah. Dilma, thank you. How long have you been in Liverpool?
Oh, God, it's since 2003.
I look forward to our next conversation. I keep a collection of hybrid accents. They just I don't know why I do know why. They are like living, breathing proof of integration, aren't they? Living, breathing proof of harmony and humanity and all the things that people whose voices seem to dominate public discourse at the moment either absolutely hate or claim cannot be achieved. There it is. Thank you, Dilman. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I want to choose my words very carefully. When I usually do, not always, perhaps. The more light-hearted matters, I don't have to choose my words very carefully. But this isn't a particularly serious matter, but I want to choose my words very carefully. I'm just I've been married now for 25 years, would you believe? I know all the lines about her deserving a medal and you get less for murder. But so far, Mrs. O'Brien remains by far the best thing that has ever happened to me. And while we don't agree about absolutely everything, our world view is very similar. You know, our view of our fellow humans, our view of the world is very similar. You don't choose your parents. You do choose your partner, generally speaking. And the question of whether you can love someone to whom you are diametrically opposed politically, it really interests me. And it's come into focus this morning because of research suggesting that you are more likely to split up if you disagree politically, which isn't that shocking, is it? Whether it's Labour versus Conservative or Leave versus Remain, if you are in a couple with opposing political views, you are significantly more likely to break up. The study, rather cleverly, is entitled Sleeping with the Enemy. The risk of separation for couples was about 38% higher if they supported different parties. And this stands comparison with having different educational backgrounds or divergent religious views. I mean, I find this fascinating for a number of reasons. The most obvious one you can work out for yourself. It's just the human condition, isn't it? But I've found myself thinking quite a lot over the last few years about being friends with people who have different political views. So one of my best friends was an ardent Brexiter, and the son, in fact, of one of the most famous Brexiters in the country. And we had some really good old-fashioned debates. And then when events proved me completely right about everything, we stopped talking about it. And I was happy to do so. But we're bloke mates, you know. There's millions of different things we can talk about. We can make each other laugh with a raised eyebrow or a shared memory or whatever it may be. And I love him, you know. And I've got family members who are on the other side of that particular debate. My parents were very democratic voters over the course of my lifetime. I think they popped across in almost every box, albeit that they are or were Labour people at root. My father was a Daily Telegraph journalist, so obviously spent an awful lot of his time breaking bread with people who would have come from very different backgrounds and ended up in very different positions. And so the point is, I don't know. What was I thinking about? I have to be careful. I don't want to betray any confidences. But if I'm with somebody who shares my worldview, which I suppose you would loosely describe as ideologically Christian, as in believing that all people are created equal and that there is no hierarchy of humanity, which of course some religions teach the opposite of. But that's generally the bedrock of my position would be that facts matter and everybody's equal, right? Some are maybe more equal than others. But when I where people I really respect, and this has happened a couple of times on recent full disclosures, and I don't think I can tell you who it was because I can't remember whether the conversation took place on air or not, but a couple of times on full disclosures, people who I admire and look up to, people who are older and more experienced than me, have not let slip. They've very casually commented upon friendships with public figures in this country who I think are bonkers. Most obviously recently on the climate change issue. So someone who I think is brilliant, dropping into the conversation the fact that they're friends with someone who I think is bonkers, a full-on climate change denier. They weren't always like that, but they've become that subsequently. And I don't know, this isn't necessarily what the topic's going to be about. It's going to be about actual romantic partnerships. But as I get older, think maybe I need to be more... maybe I shouldn't turn down all the TV panel shows just because I'm going to end up sitting next to somebody who I consider to be repellent. Maybe if we all go for dinner afterwards, you still find their opinions repellent, but you like them more. I don't know is the short answer, but there's got to be a huge distinction between friend and lover, partner. Alice puts it quite well. You don't build your life around a friend the way you do around a partner. Your life has to reflect you, or it becomes almost unbearable. That's a really good point. 10 minutes after 11. And that's yes. And then to follow on, as Derek reminds me, on the point about everyone being created equal, it's behaviour that should determine your reaction. It's what people do, not what they are or how they're born. But and the reason I'm sounding a little bit constipated, verbally, don't worry, I'm fine on the other front, a lot of dates. But the reason I'm sounding a little bit constipated verbally constipated, is because I don't know that I want to say out loud what is bubbling away in the back of my mind. Now, you know I will, because I always do. It's just sometimes it's rather harder to drag it out of my consciousness than it is at other times. And what I want to say is, I don't think you can, surely. I mean, if it's something huge politically, like Brexit, or Tory versus I can't quite imagine what that would be. Do you just never ever talk about? But then you've got to have your internal dialogue, aren't you? What's the topic you're thinking of now that isn't exactly what we're about to talk about? It's COVID. Do you remember when the COVID conspiracies were kicking in, all the anti-vax lot were kind of dominating online discourse? And I couldn't find a way into it because I didn't really want to talk to the headbangers. I didn't want to shout down rabbit holes. But I did want to know what it was like. And we stumbled upon that this is good. I don't think I'm going to get a whole show out of people who disagree about me, but I've got one example already. That's distracted me actually. Kate, stop sending me fascinating anecdotes while I'm trying to put together a conversation. What we stumbled upon was what it's like to be the partner of someone who's gone down a rabbit hole. And there's nothing funny about what we discovered. It was putting potentially terminal strain on relationships. If you were in lockdown with somebody who had persuaded themselves online that vaccines were worse than the virus, or that the virus didn't exist, or that there was some international conspiracy to, I forget quite what the quotes, logic end quotes, was behind the notion of population control. If your partner went mad during lockdown as a consequence of online conspiracy theories, it would put an almost intolerable strain on your relationship. And I found that absolutely self-evident. I mean, that was the least surprising thing about the whole phone-in, wasn't it? When someone would say to you, I love him, he's my boyfriend, but he's not the man I fell in love with, and I don't know if the relationship is going to survive. And you just go, well, yeah, of course it's not. If he carries on believing this utter bilge, then how could you possibly stay with him? So then you transfer that to politics, and it's not going to be quite as obvious. It's not like denying the appliance of science. But something like Brexit, if you could have had polite conversations in the run-up to it, I think we'll be better off out. Do you really? Yes, I do, because of this, that, and the... And now, 9 years later, you're just pointing at it, and I presume that either the person who's been proved wrong has admitted it, or you just never talk about it, or you split up. I mean, how hard is it to stay in love with someone whose politics you find repellent? And I like the word repellent. It may be the wrong word to use, in which case feel free to substitute your own. But polite disagreement is fine. I'm thinking about something that runs deeper. Have you broken up over politics? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Have you broken up over politics? And if you haven't, how hard is it? I mean, if I was a scientist, what I'd really like to do is somehow establish the point at which a relationship is likely to become unsustainable. So how deep does the disagreement have to be? It's unlikely that you're going to agree about everything. And if you begin at the shallow end, it would be how to load the dishwasher, for example. But at the deep end, it would be how should we treat foreign-born neighbours, or how should we treat children, or how should we treat farmers, or how should we treat European Union membership. So do you see what I mean? Nobody's going to agree about absolutely everything. But how hard is it? We can't answer the question that I want to ask you, which is, how much disagreement can a relationship tolerate? Well, maybe we can. But no one can measure it. No one's got a little tape measure to go, 48%, James, 48% disagreement, and the relationship can survive 52% disagreement, and all bets are off. You'll be down the divorce court before you can say Jack Robinson. So I just want to know what it's like. To either be in a relationship with someone who's and what if you slowly discover it? What if they keep it quiet? I should read you Kate's message, shouldn't I went on a first date once, James, where the first topic of conversation was your show. I agree with the vast majority of your opinions, and he didn't. We found ourselves diametrically opposed on almost everything. There's even a viral clip of him arguing with you about Brexit. Good Lord. If you read this out, can you please ask him to bring some lemonade with him tonight? Does that mean that the relationship has survived, despite him being wrong about everything and you being largely right? Or that you're just sort of now platonic friends? We may find out. But how hard is it to be... And what if people's politics change? Here's a good one from Michelle. My husband of 22 years has taken a shine to Nigel Farage and Tommy 10 names. I just ignore any comments he makes and smile. We met long before those two came along, and we will be together long after. We agree on pretty much everything else. Okay, so you're just going for the grin and bear it. And presumably, by not responding, you don't end up in the kind of argument that you would end up in if you were to put your feelings forward in those kind of moments, in those kind of contexts. But I don't know how deep it goes, whether you find yourself thinking you're not the man I married, because there's no way the man I married would have fallen for these characters. That's what I want to know, okay? It's a nice intro in the Times. If Cupid truly wanted to help you find love, he would swap his bow and arrow for a ballot paper and ask where you stood on Brexit. How hard is it to be in a relationship, a romantic relationship with someone whose politics you find very, very difficult? And tell me also the stories of it breaking down. I mean, that must be heartbreaking. You love someone, but can you love someone and hate their... There, we got there in the end. 17 minutes it took. Can you love someone and hate their politics? 0345 6060973. And working on the presumption that, of course, you can. What's it like? What's it like to love someone and hate their politics? And where is the breaking point? Okay? That is a fairly jumbled introduction, but we got there in the end. You know exactly what it is that I'm looking for, and you will know whether or not you are what I'm looking for. Can you love someone as deeply if you hate their politics as you would do if you shared the same politics? 0345 6060973. And has it actually, possibly because of developments in the course of a relationship, one of you has gone that way, the other one has gone that way politically, and you end up going in opposite directions romantically as well? Your stories on this, 0345 6060973 is the number you need. And, I'm looking forward to this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 after 11. Just a quick reminder, if you're going to text me, that if you don't want me to read your name out, particularly if you're WhatsApping, because your name will appear at the bottom of the message, whether you want it to or not, make sure you stick at the top, don't mention my name. Don't mention my name. Please don't mention my name. This texter did, but only on the first of 2 messages, so it's a jolly good job I clicked on the history button and saw the first. Anyway, I'm not going to mention your name. Don't mention my name if you read this. Hey, I told you that, didn't I? But I agree. Brexit, COVID, Gaza, climate change have brought our differences to the fore. And now, after 20-odd years of marriage, it's gone down the drain and divorce will be finalised in August. I work from home. And for almost 3 years now, as soon as I hear his key in the lock, I switch to another channel if I'm watching the news, because anything will set him off. He can rant for hours about what Labour have or haven't done and about people who oppose his idol, Donald Trump. We no longer talk about flashpoint topics like you, Gaza, or Islam. That's a hat trick, isn't it? Me, Gaza and Islam. Or anybody. Any of the other things that I noted in my previous post. And he doesn't know how to agree to disagree. He will raise his voice until I just shut down and completely ignore him. I can't wait for August. I'm so sorry to read that. But it is, I suppose, almost exactly what I have been talking about. The unsustainability. You can disagree with people happily, Rianne writes, but when the disagreement uncovers a lack of compassion, it starts to be about values, not views, and that's when things can get a little bit fatal, as it were. 21 after 11 is the time. Sandy's in Colchester. Sandy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I can't speak personally, but I'm speaking for my deceased parents, who were absolutely diametrically opposed politically. My father left, he was very left-wing, and he left a very left-wing wife for my mother, who was very right-wing. And they were absolutely in love. I mean, completely besotted with each other. And but when it came to some 12 or so years later, when 1974's elections came along, my mother had a Conservative poster in the right-hand side of the living room window. My father had a Labour poster in the left-hand side of the window. They had big rows. He tore down her poster, she tore down his poster, and they replaced the posters.
Was it good-natured?
It ended up good-natured. It started out quite fierce.
Oh, I thought it would be the other way round, actually.
I know it was strange. I think there were flashpoints where I used to get quite scared about my mother's views on things sometimes.
Okay.
And my father said to me quietly, he said, "You're your father's daughter."
Right.
And I never stopped loving my mum. I loved her.
And nor did your dad.
Much. I think if he'd have survived, I think they would have divorced.
Right.
So there was affection. They had lots of things in common on literature and music, and but. It's something I don't know. It's something
that message I read just before you came on seemed to me to be very clever about the difference between views and opinions and actual something that runs deeper and compassion being the crucial word. If it speaks to a lack of compassion, and you are a compassionate person, then it's hard to see how love survives.
Absolutely. But the bizarre thing was my mother was incredibly compassionate about certain things, about certain, children, animals. And then when it came to blacks and Jews, she had extreme views because my grandmother had been a black shirt.
Oh my days! This has taken an unexpected turn. So, that's the autobiography title sorted. My grandma was a black shirt. My grandma was a black shirt by Sandy in Colchester. I'll put in an early order on Amazon for that one. I think that's holy moly. And I hesitate to ask this question because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But are you your father's daughter?
Yes, I am deeply. Yeah. He's with me every day.
Oh, bless you.
And my mother.
Yeah, because you love her.
In many ways. Yes, I did. And I can get a bit tearful, sorry.
Hey, so can I. Don't start. Seriously, you'll set me off. But you don't, that's why I said at the beginning, you choose your partner, you don't choose your parents. And you can love your parents despite them holding hideous views. It's much harder to love a partner who holds hideous views, but partly because you don't have to. There's no sort of genetic demand that, they haven't harmed you, they haven't abused you, they've looked after you, they've loved you, they've nurtured you, and then they say hideous things about Jewish people or black people, and you kind of you end up with a form of cognitive dissonance.
My father, I'll sort of finish on this really. My father said to me when I was late teenage, he said to me, Sandy, he said, I don't care who your chosen partner is, and I don't care what sex they are, I don't care what creed they are. He says, as long as you're happy. Oh. My mother said, if you bring a black man home to this house, I'll lie on my bed and die. And I was just silent about it.
Yeah, I'm not, you know me, I'm not often lost for words, Sandy, but I can't, could you imagine a more effective depiction of what I've tried to set this conversation up to be than those...
I couldn't wait to phone you.
I bet. That is absolutely extraordinary, those two. And also, thank you for reminding me how lucky I am in the aftermath of Father's Day to have had, like you, a truly wonderful father. It's something that you don't realise is serendipitous when you're young. You think everybody's got a great dad, but it's only as you get older that you realise not everybody does. Not everybody is as lucky as you and me. Thank you, Sandy, for that. Good Lord, imagine that. I just want you to be happy. I don't care who you bring home, sex, creed, colour. If you bring home a black boyfriend, I will go upstairs and die. And they were in love with each other. Graham has been in touch, and there's no request here for me not to say your name, which is just as well. Sometimes I say the name, and then I think maybe you don't want me to say the name, and then I end up not reading out the message. But in for a penny, in for a pound. Hi, James. I'm afraid I had to leave my French wife and the beautiful mountains of Provence when I discovered that she had voted for Marine Le Pen. I'm now back in Lincoln and living the dream of a Labour government. 27 minutes after 11. I don't know if the second bit is tongue-in-cheek or not, Graham, but that is very much on point, isn't it, for the conversation that we're having. Abby's in Birmingham. Abby, what would you like to say?
Hi, but I'm a first-time caller. It's my husband that's always listening to you, but I eavesdrop. Basically, what it is, I was born in 1979, so around about the time that Thatcher came into power.
Yes. And
from year dot with me, I was brought up by both of my parents, thinking that the sun shone out of Maggie Thatcher's backside and how she was wonderful.
There's an image I didn't need. There's an image I didn't need at 27 minutes after 11. That's all right. Carry on.
But yeah.
Yes.
So I grew up always having that. Not even having my own views, but having that drummed into me from a very, very young child.
Yes.
And I left home when I was 16 and then really wasn't interested in politics. And then I met my now husband in 2002.
Right.
So well over 20 years ago.
Yes.
And he grew up in a very, very Labour household. And of course, I'd had a Conservative dumped into me.
Yes.
And the way that we sorted it is obviously over several bottles of wine.
Yes.
We didn't have a blazing row, but we had quite a heated debate.
Yes.
About his opinions and my opinions. And after several hours and several bottles of wine, as I say, I was totally Labour.
Oh,
I say was.
Okay, go on.
I say was because yes, I was. The only problem is now is the Labour government that we have right now. I think everybody's sick of, including me and my husband. I'm not Conservative. I am Labour, but for what Labour stands for, and the way that the government is being run at the moment really isn't Labour. But just to put it back to obviously this heated debate went on 20 years ago.
Right, really? And so you thrashed it all out in the course of one evening?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
he
ordered a curry and lots of bottles of wine and had a really, really heated debate over it.
And he persuaded you?
He didn't even need to persuade me. It was...
never... I don't want to patronise you, but you'd never really stopped to think about things. You'd just taken what your mum and dad told you as gospel.
I was only 22.
Yeah.
And as I say, it was drummed into me from a baby, conservative. So really, I was sort of brainwashed into being conservative. And then, like I say, when I was 16, I left home. And then you want to enjoy being a teenager and that. You're not thinking about politics. But by the time me and my now husband met, I was 22. And, yeah, we thrashed it out at a really heated debate. And I just thought, when it comes to the bit where you think, I can't argue with that.
Yes, I do. I do know what you mean. And I hope Keir Starmer's people are listening as well, because that is interesting on so many different levels. Albeit, who knows whether you'd have survived 23 years if you'd stuck to your parents' politics while he'd stuck to his. I think it's unlikely. Emma puts it well. Politics are principles. If you hold your principles dear, then surely you can't reconcile. And then you sort of find yourself wondering whether people who see politics as a bit of a game, and tragically, politics itself is populated by people who see politics as a bit of a game, then you could survive with very different views. You'd probably even be thinking, I might get a column out of that. We disagree, but I don't feel my politics deeply. I don't have a passion for my principles. Therefore, if someone's got different principles, it's not really going to upset me that much because I don't believe that deeply in anything. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I sometimes envy people like that. The liberating notion of not caring about anything, up to and including facts, must be quite, less exhausting than caring, I suppose. Thank you, Abby. What a lovely call. It's 31 minutes after 11. A couple of phone lines free on this. How hard is it to stay in love with someone whose politics repel you? 0345 6060 973. Or, did you go the whole hog and break up? And speaking of political disagreement, PMQs is on the way at 12. It's the deputies today. I've got some rather bad news for Alex Burghardt fans. And I'll share it with you after the headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. John says, when I was in London, I was going out with a Russian woman who was a big supporter of Putin's. I was ambivalent about him until he invaded Ukraine, and then I became very much opposed and saw him as a massive danger even to this country. She continued to be a massive supporter, and this ended the relationship. This is, again, a request for me not to mention any names. I have to be a little bit careful, don't I, on this, because I don't want to get anybody into any trouble. So another anonymous one. I just don't believe you can truly love your partner if the views are opposing enough. My parents' 25-year marriage is one of opposing views, and my mum has now fallen out of love with my dad. It's about values. Interestingly, my twin has taken my mum's view of being more left-wing, where my older sister is more right-leaning, so we agree to just leave out political discussions. I'm currently looking for a partner and had a date with someone who was completely opposite to me in politics. It was very difficult as we just didn't value the same things. I left a bit drunk and internally very angry. I still can't get my head around a Brexiteer thinking that it's all been a roaring success. But I just don't think the argument is worth it. It's simply not a match for me if you don't have shared values. There's quite a lot going on here. Another one who doesn't want their name read out, which is absolutely fair enough, split up with a partner over Brexit. She was for and I was against. I think when you realise your core values crash, it's very difficult to reconcile. The irony was that we both voted yes in the Indie referendum up here in Scotland, although after No won that vote, she subscribed to the idea that if we got Brexit, independence would follow. I'm still trying to work that logic out, but it was doing the rounds up here. I don't know really. I don't know what the kind of abiding lesson of all this is, except that you don't get to choose your parents, so you can love them even if they possess politics that is fairly repellent, but you do get to choose your partner. So where is the line between politics and values? It's not right-left. If somebody says that they don't want you to bring a black boyfriend home, that's not right-wing versus left-wing. That's just racist. And if that's your partner who has views like that, and you don't, I would imagine it would be impossible to sustain. Just going back to Sandy's call. and her grandma was a black shirt. Do you know, I've had 3 messages of people saying my grandma was also a black shirt. What is it about this show that attracts the grandchildren of fascists? 11:37 is the time. David is in Croydon. David, what would you like to say?
So I'm Kate's boyfriend, the girl who texted in.
Oh, gosh, yeah. OK. Oh, wow. And so you did go so the relationship has lasted, despite you disagreeing about Gaza, Islam and me?
Yeah.
OK. What do you want to tell me?
Just firstly that I will get some lemonade.
Well done.
And also you just said, like, you wondered if it was still going. I just thought I'd let you know that, yeah, we are.
That it is. So where do you think the line is between politics and values? So you can still love each other, even though...
No, we're fundamentally opposed on values as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's... absolutely everything sort of big we disagree on, but the little stuff we don't.
And how often do you talk about the big stuff?
Every now and then. I'll get home and she'll say, "Oh, did you listen to James today?" And we'll talk about something, like if something goes on in Israel or something. Anything. I used to do a David's Daily News, and I'd get in the car and I'd tell her the news from my point of view each day, and she'd be like, "Oh my God."
How long have you been together?
I'm not sure, ages. A couple of years, I think.
Okay. What would be, the kind of biggest thing that she finds difficult about you, and the biggest thing that you find difficult about her politically? The biggest issues?
The biggest thing for her about me is probably... I don't know, all of it. I said to the producer when I joined Reform and told her about it, she donated £25 to some charity or other to try and equal it out. Pretty much everything. Israel's a big one, I think.
Yeah.
Because we literally couldn't be more sort of different on that.
Any changes of mind ever over the course? I mean, because supporting Israel in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th and supporting them now, for example, are 2 very, very different things. But I sense... Yeah.
I mean, I called you about that the day after, I think, on the 8th of October, and even you and I agreed. But we wouldn't agree now, would we, that 50-odd thousand people are dead and you're still on side? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's... That's what I say. It's the big things that we disagree about, but the little things are what you live with day to day. So they're what matter, aren't they?
Yes and no. I mean, for many people, values are deeply important, but and they would be deal breakers. But in some ways, I suppose it's I don't know quite what the word is. Important. Is it important to see beyond the things you really care about? Or to ignore the things? Is there anything that would be a deal breaker for either of you?
But it depends what you. Do you
still think Brexit has gone well?
I'd still vote Leave.
That's not what I asked, mate.
No, it's not going great.
But you've joined the party led by the bloke who was arguably most responsible for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
did you think of Liz Truss's fiscal event budget? How did that work out for you?
Yeah, see, I thought that was good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Still?
Well, it wasn't... See, actually, this is where I can sort of take little things and, say that me and her are on the same page. Because we both agree that ended badly, and I say, oh, well, that's because the markets did it. And then because I'm a capitalist and she isn't, I say, oh, yeah, well, actually, the markets did sort of mess things up in that case. So there's little...
But that doesn't mean anything, David. It was literally... spending plans built upon absolutely no evidence of where the money was going to come from that spooked the bond markets into making loans to our government essentially unsustainable. It would have cost far too much money even to keep the lights on in that context, which everybody predicted, including Rishi Sunak. who, of course, was Liz Truss's rival to become leader. And the only reason I asked was because your man Nigel Farage described it as the best Tory budget since 1986, which is probably the second stupidest thing he's ever done. And yet you're signing up for more of that at the moment.
Yeah, I call him Uncle. When I'm talking to Kate, I call him Uncle Nigel.
Yeah.
Uncle Nigel's invited me to a party. You seen what Uncle Nigel's done?
Yeah.
I know. I mean, she really, really, really.
Where do you stand on Putin being the most admirable politician in the world?
No, you see, everyone's got their faults, haven't they? Everyone makes mistakes.
Well,
no, clearly
okay.
not.
So you and Kate agree about that?
We agree that Putin is a despot, yeah.
But you're signed up making money, giving money to the party led by the bloke that thinks he's the bee's knees.
I don't think he does think that anymore.
Oh, when did he change his mind?
I don't know, probably when he invaded Ukraine.
But not when he invaded Crimea?
No.
Okay. I mean, I don't know what to say to you. I mean, an awful lot of people probably think Kate should run away at 100 miles an hour, but I'm not one of those people, because if she likes you and you like her, then good luck to you both. But
I am really, really good looking. I should mention that.
Yeah, I think we both know that's not true. But anyway, good luck to you. There we are. 11:43 is the time. Louise is in Watford. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Hi, James. I think a lot of it, honestly, is not necessarily about the exact degree to which you disagree. It's often how much you are able to deal with it. So me and my ex were actually much more, I guess, on like a spectrum, both much more lefty.
Yeah.
But any tiny points of disagreement within that, because I think I'm quite comfortable playing devil's advocate, I can have contradictory opinions. Sorry.
Yes.
I think I actually grew up in quite a conservative family environment and then swung more lefty. So I still have some opinions that are, again, a bit more contradictory, but I'm still broadly pretty lefty.
We all? We've all got contradictory views.
Exactly. Whereas he couldn't deal with any contradictions in any opinions or anything that didn't completely line up with what all he thought his mates thought, which is very, very wokey, lefty, quite, I don't know, by template thinking.
So I was reading Nick Cave on wokeness the other day, and he talked about, I forget exactly what the word was that he used, but he talked about something I haven't really come across, but I've read about it and it exists. It's the people who think that they're the good guys having no tolerance at all for people
and
that's what you're describing your ex as. I mean, it's relevant that he's your ex, I suppose.
Yeah, but my current boyfriend, we actually are much more in opposition. We're not in opposition. We're both, I guess, vaguely centrist-ish. I'm much more lefty. Yeah. He's much more to the right. We do disagree about, I guess, international politics, maybe a bit less so. We did have some difficult conversations because he's Jewish.
Yes.
When Israel Gaza really kicked off, we had some conversations about that. We're much more in alignment now. I think if it was in reform, I don't think I could particularly deal with that. That might be a line too far.
That would be a deal breaker.
We do disagree about other things.
Yeah,
so it's loads of things. So we can talk about it.
It's the ability to disagree that is important, as opposed to agreeing to disagree. It's the ability to disagree. If you don't have that at all, then then I can't really see how the relationship gets sustained. Thank you, Louise. It is 11:45. I like this. This is what Nick Cave said. I thought I'd dig out that quote. It's in today's news. There's a lack of mercy, a lack of forgiveness. These go against what I fundamentally believe on a spiritual level as much as anything, so it's a tricky one. The problem with the right taking hold of this world is that it's made the discussion impossible to have without having to join a whole load of not jobs who have their problem with it. That's Nick Cave on wokeness, and I guess he's not talking about somebody saying, if you bring home a black boyfriend, I will want to die. It's this word woke getting applied to a sort of ideological intolerance that I didn't come across except in the context of transgender people, but I'm perfectly willing to accept other people have come across it, and that lack of mercy would sum it up quite well. People who think that they've got a monopoly on compassion but have absolutely no mercy for mistakes that people may have made or for disagreement. but could you sustain a relationship with somebody on the other side of that particular Rubicon? It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 minutes to 12. You're just tuning in. This is going to sound a little odd, but continuing the theme of grandparents and Oswald Mosley, this is from Nora. My grandmother threw a brick at Oswald Mosley when he visited Liverpool and knocked him out. She was taken to the police station and charged. Her defence was, it wasn't me who threw the bricks, it was the hand of God. I don't know whether that's true or not, Nora, but it's a story, and obviously you can't go around throwing bricks at people regardless of what their politics may be. 10 to 12 is the time. But can you sustain a loving and romantic relationship with someone whose politics you find close to repellent? 03456060973 is the number that you need. Nathaniel's in Birmingham. Nathaniel, what would you like to say?
Hey, so I haven't been in a situation where I've been in a relationship with somebody that had views that I thought were that problematic. But I did tell you, producer, that essentially, if you're someone that I respect, if you're someone that I align with, and then I find out that your partner has certain views, then I might respect you less.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll start to question. I might start to question my respect for someone based on who they choose to be with. If that makes sense.
No, of course it makes sense. It's weird though, isn't it? Because I mean, part of me thinks, how could you not? How could you not base your view of somebody on what they believe to be true? And but it also sounds intolerant at the same time. Love can transcend opinion. I didn't want to say anything to Sandy because it was her parents we were talking about, but you know, sexual attraction can blind you to all sorts of flaws in a partner in the early days, months, years of a relationship. Only when that begins to fade do you have reality begins to bite and problems kick in. So love is chemical, opinions are intellectual.
And that's the thing, and I think that's especially true, in my view anyway, it's especially true when you're dealing with any type of intolerance, when it's something to do with, respecting someone's right to live, whether it's to do with, genocide and things like that. I think there are certain things where it almost, for me anyway, is completely black and white.
Yeah. And so you couldn't fall in love in the first place with somebody possessed of views that you found repellent. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think that, I would start to judge even a friend if because I've had that. I've had friends come over, tell me, my partner's been saying this or they've been saying that. And I'm questioning both of you at that point.
Yeah. I mean, a part of me wants to say, I'll chill out a bit. But the other part of me is reminded of that notion that your politics are your principles, and your principles, how tightly you hold your principles is the mark of a man or a woman. Thank you, Nathaniel. This is from Mark in Liverpool. Scassers are knocking it out of the park today. My daughter recently came out as gay. Not a problem for us as her parents, as long as you're happy, we said. The thing is, James, her girlfriend supports Man United. Should I just be glad she's not a Tory? Yes, Mark, take the win, mate. Take the win. PMQ's on the way. It was supposed to be the deputies today. I hope I didn't alarm anybody when I said bad news for Alex Burghardt fans. I know what you're thinking. Who's Alex Burghardt? And if you're not thinking that, you're thinking, who the hell would be an Alex Burghardt fan? Probably old David in Croydon that we spoke to a moment ago. He's probably got a picture of Alex Burghardt on his pencil case. But anyway, Alex Burghardt is supposed to be the deputy, so it would, I think, ordinarily be him squaring up to Angela Rayner across the dispatch box today. But I am told, I am reliably informed, it will in fact be Chris Philp. And appropriately enough, it will be Aggie Chambre who joins us, deputising for Natasha Clark. So a day of the deputies coming up in about 5 minutes' time on PMQs. Before that, Furhan is in Walthamstow. Furhan, what would you like to say?
Well, hello, James.
Hello.
Yes. So on this topic of relationships and things like that, so I am a gay Muslim. Okay, so I'm also very pro-Palestine, very staunchly pro-Palestine. I go to all the marches every week, wearing my keffiyeh. And, I stand against pink washing. But anyway, so also I have a private life and I go on the apps, one of them's called Growler for bears. and I come across someone.
You didn't need to add that, did you? You could have just said, I met someone online. You didn't have to advertise your own personal enthusiasms in quite that way. But yeah, more than welcome to, Farhan. And there we are now. Because, I mean, I'm going to have to explain to the producer afterwards what that means.
Well, let's put it this way. He's very handsome. He's
very hairy.
Big, heavy built.
Very
hairy, big, long beard, right? And I was in Tottenham, and I was thinking, this guy looks Jewish, right?
Yes.
So I was like, that doesn't matter at all. I'll still chat to him. He had lots of spicy chats. He comes over, and when I see him coming out the cab into my flat, I can notice a little imprint on his head where his skull cap was, but he tucked in all of his Jewish tassels and put them in his trousers. So anyway, we get busy. We have lots of fun, and then when the pillow talk happens, he's asking me, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I'm Afghan heritage, I'm Muslim. I'm like, where are you from? He's like, oh, I'm Turkish. And I was like, are you Muslim? He's like, yeah. Anyway, a couple of days later, it turns out we're watching TV, and he's talking about Ben Stiller. He's like, oh, that's that Jewish actor. I was like, listen, are you Jewish? I said to him. He's like, yes, I am. Is it going to change anything? I was like, no, of course not. We had a hug. It was really sweet. But then, he asked me to drop him off home, and it turns out he's part of the Lubavitch community, Chabad community in Stamford Hill. He gets out my car, puts his skull cap on. Right. All the local community go, hello, Mazel Tov.
Careful. I don't give away. I don't know. His family might not know he's gay, so don't give me any more kind of identifying characteristic.
You've had your fill, James. You've had your fill.
So what was the deal breaker in the relationship?
So there was not so much a deal breaker. So we did touch upon Israel-Palestine, and I said, look, I'm very staunchly pro-Palestine. So I said, I don't really like Israel anyway. I've got bad memories associated with it. It's only where I go for funerals.
Yes.
I'm all right, okay, because all Jews have to be buried in Israel. They couldn't be buried in France, for example, because of...
where are we going, Farhan, on this?
Basically, I said, look, I would like to be with him again, but I don't think... I've told him, look...
You don't see much future in the relationship. You can't be with someone who's what?
It's hard to imagine it. That's not giving... Well, I don't know. That's giving a clear opinion on what's going on.
Okay. In Gaza itself, ambivalence is not enough. You need to
I don't think it's enough for me.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I get that. I
really like him, and I think he's really sexy and really hot.
Yeah, all right.
I want to be with him.
I get the picture, all right. David has been in touch, and he says, what's the name of that app again? Asking for a friend?
Growler.
Stop it! It's 11:57. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQs is around the corner. Aggie Chambre is here. No Alex Burkhart. This is terrible news.
For who? No, just
Alex Burkhart fans.
For the Alex Burkhart fans, of course. Yes, so we thought, and I say we, and I very much include Westminster and Conservative Party press officers who told me this morning that it was going to be Alex Burkhart. We all thought it was going to be Alex Burkhart because he's the deputy. He's the person who usually does PMQs when Sir Keir Starmer isn't doing it, and so therefore Kemi Badenoch can't do it. But no, it is Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary. And I've spoken to a few people about why, and they think it is simply because he has been leading on grooming gangs, and they think that the Tories want to monopolise on grooming gangs as much as they possibly can today. So they think what he will do over the course of his 6 questions is try and drill down on the detail of grooming gangs and try and ask some difficult questions of Angela Rayner on that, how successful he'll be. We really don't know. He's never done PMQs before, ever, and it is obviously a difficult thing. Even Kemi Badenoch's admitted that by saying she's getting better every week.
Is it a different Chris Philp that was policing minister under the last government?
It's the very same.
That's right. And how long were they in power?
14 years.
And how long has Angela Rayner been Deputy Prime Minister?
Almost 1 year.
Yeah. Oh, that would be fun. And what was it Louise Casey said yesterday about politicising this issue?
She said that she hopes that people wouldn't carry on politicising this issue. And she also said...
She called out the opposition by name on Monday night on Newsnight, but here they are, about piling in again in direct opposition to what Baroness Casey herself has actually urged.
And she also said...
We could be wrong.
We could be wrong. And she also said as well, if we'd got this right years ago, then I doubt we'd be in this place now. She said that yesterday at the Home Affairs Select Committee.
Yeah.
So...
referring probably to her own report, which dropped in 2015, when they didn't even have the camouflage of coalition. It was an entirely Conservative administration. Anything else likely to come up today? It's a weird one, this, because... as Louise Casey also said, you'd think on this the opposition would simply say, let's all work together to make right what has gone wrong. The opposition have clearly decided not to. I presume that, like that weird chap who used to be in Farage's outfit, they thought they were going to get a massive political weapon out of promising to do an inquiry, and it's been taken away. So they're not quite sure what to do next, except... try and turn this into a negative for Labour, even though Labour are doing what they said they wanted all along, but declined to do during the 14 years that they were actually in power. It's very, very odd. The press conference yesterday was the oddest moment, perhaps, of all.
I completely agree with that. And also, yesterday, as we talked about, Kemi Badenoch brought along survivors and parents of survivors. And they were saying, we now want to... Please don't politicise this. Yeah. We now want to move on. We now want the inquiry to happen. And it's similar in a way to, do you remember at PMQs a few weeks ago when Sir Keir Starmer basically announced that he was going to do a U-turn on winter fuel. And Kemi Badenoch didn't notice and then sort of didn't really know where to go with it. Because it's quite difficult after you've been arguing for something and then you get what you want. And then you sort of do need to just say, OK, brilliant, let's work together. As you say, Louise
prioritise the victims, prioritise the victims, prioritise the victims. But it's not just them. Political point scoring by almost everybody involved in this, except Louise Casey, who has once again proven herself to be a truly, truly impressive human being. This is the point where I remind you that we will cross live to the House of Commons as soon as Chris Philp gets to his feet and PMQs begins. Don't be confused by the voices that you hear. The other one will be Angela Rayner. It is a clash of the deputies. If he doesn't devote all 6 questions to the report Labour have called after 14 years of Tory failure to do so, what else might we expect to come up today?
Well, there's a few different Home Affairs-y stories around, actually.
What is his job?
He's Shadow Home Secretary.
Right. Carry on.
So... small boats, potentially, and Number 10 saying yesterday that problem of people coming to the UK in small boats across the Channel had got worse, and official figures showing more than 1,500 migrants across the Channel last week alone. So, he has been very vocal about that, although, it's worth saying as well, the previous Conservative government, they tried to strike a deal with France that didn't really help, and they had record numbers as well. So it's difficult territory, but it's something that Chris Philp hasn't... He's been pretty happy to talk about that before, so that could come up too. There's also going to be, straight after this, a ministerial statement from the Transport Secretary on HS2.
Ah, yes.
They're basically going to say it's going to cost more money and it's going to be delayed beyond the target date of 2033. And there's no reasonable way to deliver the railway line on schedule and within budget. But I bring you back once again to the thing that we've talked about before. The Conservatives were in power for 14 years, and lots of the things that the Transport Secretary, Hadi Alexander, will blame on the delays for HS2 did happen under the Conservatives. So that might potentially be tricky territory too.
We shall have to wait and see, won't we? And Angela Rayner, can we remember the last time she was in the chair?
It was a few months ago, but funnily enough, I think I was here too. So it's almost like every time Angela Rayner's up, Natasha goes on holiday, so I have to do it instead.
Almost as if it's as if it's planned that way. I'm just trying to think of anything I might add to the list that could be picked up on by Chris Philp. I think you've probably got it. Or we'll be taken by surprise, won't we? We always are.
We used to be able to guess a bit easier, but it's become a bit more difficult with this opposition. I don't think we're to blame.
Okay, here's a question for you. Do you think that the unbiased observer will find Chris Philp to be a better or worse operator at the dispatch box than Kemi Badenoch?
Good question. I think potentially better, because I think he is good at the dispatch box, and I think he's had more experience. However, he has not done PMQs before.
Has he never done it?
He's never done it before, so he might find that structure. People have talked about how difficult that structure was, but I'm told by somebody close to him that when he was in the department, civil servants were always very impressed by his eye to detail.
Really?
So maybe.
But isn't he the bloke who got Rwanda mixed up with the Congo?
They were very impressed by his eye to detail.
But I suppose it depends who was in there before him, doesn't it? That would be the comparison to make. It's quite late this week. I've run out of things to say. Aggie, you got anything interesting to add to the conversation?
We also are going to get the welfare bill today. That's published. So that actually
be unconfined.
So that will be pretty interesting because there's lots of Labour MPs who are seriously concerned about that. I suspect that probably won't come up at PMQs because I don't know.
That's good. You could tell it's late because we've moved on to things that aren't going to come up at well, there's lots that's not going to come up at PMQs. Dinner, for example. What are you having for tea? None of that's going to come. I've got some guests in, as is now my tradition or our tradition on Wednesdays. So Tim Gregory's written a fascinating new book about nuclear power and indeed its necessity. Well, basically, I've got a nuclear scientist coming into the studio at 11:30. How many people can say that? And an old mate of mine. You'll be aware of the New European newspaper. Well, it is no more. The editor will be joining us to tell us what is replacing it. That all comes after Chris Philp has covered himself in glory at the dispatch box, and/or Angela Rayner has dealt with every question he asks with aplomb. Where is Starmer?
Starmer is on his way back from the G7. He didn't leave as early as Donald Trump, so he is still travelling back. But it's weird. It's a slightly weird thing, isn't it? Because Kemi Badenoch is actually around. She could do it. But the deal is it always has to be either the leaders or not the leaders. However, I would just say, potentially we could be surprised because nobody expected Kemi Badenoch to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the tragic air crash in India and, of course, what she said about our dear colleagues Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. I also join her in calling for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while noting everything possible must be done to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition and I met with survivors and family members of the rape gang scandal. Fiona, Teresa, Lucia and Marlon. They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member that my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr. Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in charge. The Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. It is vital that scandals like this are never again covered up because of the racial background of perpetrators. And Baroness Casey's report said people who downplay the ethnic dimension are letting victims down, to use her words. So I do have to raise the language the Prime Minister used in January when he, I'm afraid to say, smeared campaigners as jumping on, quotes, a far-right bandwagon, simply for calling for the very inquiry he has now been forced to set up. Standing up for rape victims is not far-right. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise for what the Prime Minister said?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Smearing campaigners standing up for rape victims as far right is completely unacceptable, and the Prime Minister should never have said that. And I commend his predecessor, the member for Richmond, for the grooming gangs task force he set up, which led to 550 arrests in its first year. Now, Baroness Casey's report also said that a significant number of rape gang perpetrators were non-UK nationals or were asylum seekers, many of whom entered the country illegally. And we know, of course, that most illegal immigrants crossing the Channel are young men, contrary to what the Chief Secretary said last week. So does the Deputy Prime Minister now accept that the small boats crisis is a crisis of public safety as well as a border crisis?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. And let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the Honourable Gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared. We lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
If she wants to find out who's lost control of our borders, I suggest she looks to her immediate right. Because ever since the Home Secretary scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it even started, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by over 30%. And so far this year, 2025 has been the worst year in history for illegal immigrants crossing the Channel. That is on her watch. That is down to her government. The Prime Minister is now planning crisis talks with President Macron, finally admitting, in his own words, that the situation is deteriorating. The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr. Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control. When the numbers crossing the Channel this year are the highest in history. She asked about the Rwanda deterrent. I'll repeat, she obviously wasn't listening to what I said earlier. The Rwanda scheme never started. And indeed, illegal immigrants in Calais said they were...
Order! Just do it. I want to hear the question, and I'm sure our constituents want to hear the question and the answer. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Rwanda scheme never started. Illegal immigrants in Calais were saying before the election how much they wanted the Prime Minister to get elected because he would help them get here. When Australia started a similar scheme about 10 years ago, it worked within a few months. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr. Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr. Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
Goodness me, she's got a cheek. Housing starts in Q4 last year went down. Her mission to rebuild Britain is not going very well. She talks about asylum hotels. She obviously hasn't looked at the most recent numbers. The number of people in asylum hotels was higher in March this year than it was at the time of the last election. And she gave no answer about the priority being given to illegal immigrants over people living here already. Now, Mr. Speaker, a Zimbabwean paedophile due for deportation was recently allowed to stay in the UK because a court found he might face, quote, some hostility back in Zimbabwe, apparently breaching his Article 3 rights. What about the rights of children here to be protected from this dangerous paedophile? Who's looking out for their rights? Not the government. There are thousands of cases like this involving foreign criminals. So there is a solution. We need to scrap the Human Rights Act for immigration matters so this sovereign parliament decides on the law our courts apply. But her party voted against that. So I have a simple question. Why did the government side with foreign criminals and not the British public?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, they had 14 years of failure on these issues. We've also included 4,500 foreign national offenders that have been deported since we came into office, Mr. Speaker, more than they did in the same period. I take no lectures from the Johnny-come-lately who couldn't do anything when he was in office.
And Elise Midgley.
Mr. Speaker, last Saturday marked 8 years since Grenfell. 8 years fighting for justice. The Hillsborough families, including Margaret Aspinall from Huyton, have campaigned for 36 years for the Hillsborough law. Decades. So can the Deputy Prime Minister tell me today, will this Labour government bring forward the Hillsborough law without delay? Will it honour the promises made to victims of state cover-ups? And will it finally deliver justice for the 97?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question and for the work with campaigners like Margaret in their fight for justice and for mentioning Grenfell, which of course with the 8th anniversary was not so long ago. We remain fully committed to bringing in a Hillsborough law. The state has failed victims and their families too many times in the past, and that is precisely why our focus is now on getting the legislation right. I can assure her that measures will be brought forward as soon as we're confident that they will deliver, Mr. Speaker, the justice victims deserve, and we want to do this at pace.
Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my party, may I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the Air India crash. And in a week when we remember the murder of Joe Cox and David Amos, our party's thoughts are with their friends and families and all those in this House who lost their beloved friends. We also remember those who died in Grenfell tragedy. Mr. Speaker, in 2003, we Liberal Democrats were incredibly proud to lead the campaign against the Iraq War. A war in which the UK blindly followed the US in a move which was not backed by the United Nations. In light of reports that President Trump is seriously considering joining the war between Israel and Iran, launching a US strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that if President Trump does do this, that today's Labour government will not blindly follow the US into war again?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the one thing I will say is we agree with President Trump that Iran must never have nuclear weapons. But we've been consistent in urging Iran to engage in the diplomatic process and work with the United States, and we continue to support that diplomatic approach.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Deputy Prime Minister, and we support those efforts. Today, the government is set to unveil its plans to cut personal independence payments and carers allowance, a prospect which one of my constituents described as terrifying. Liberal Democrat analysis of the government's own data suggests that 1.3 million disabled people are at risk of losing some support. So can the Deputy Prime Minister honestly say, hand on heart, that this is the change that 1 million disabled people and their carers were promised?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Labour is the party of work and also the party of fairness and social justice. We've announced the plan to get Britain working again, and we're clear on the principles, Mr. Speaker, and I want to be clear on that. Those who want to work should be able to work, and those who can never work should be protected. The current system we've inherited doesn't support those that need that support, and also doesn't allow and enable those to get opportunities for employment. I have personal experience of it. I know what the Honourable Lady is saying. I know how some people are fearful of the changes, but this Labour government put its values into place and will ensure that people are supported into it where they can, and where they can't, they are supported. We are the party of the welfare state, Mr. Speaker. We set it up back after the Second World War, and we believe it should be there for people who need it, but we should also help people into work.
Sarah Champion.
20 minutes after 12 is the time, and that concludes. It started late, so therefore it has finished a little late as well. How many times can you gulp in a single sentence, do you think? How many times can a single human... I shouldn't draw attention to that. He might have some sort of medical condition. It's 12:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 after 12 is the time. A quick response from you. Nick writes, the Lib Dems are winning me over here. Angela handled him quite easily, but it was a better performance than any of Kemi Kazi's. Kemi Kazi, I haven't seen that before. I may not have read it out if I'd read that in advance. It's not a medical condition, right, Andrew? I was part of a tour Philp gave around the Houses of Parliament, and I don't remember him gulping once. PIP is not an out-of-work benefit. I'm sick of this helping people into work narrative. In the days of Blair and Hague, PMQs was worth listening to. The Conservative opposition has a serious dearth of quality and are not capable of seriously challenging the current government, especially with their own abysmal record of governance. Tristan is upset that Angela Rayner keeps mentioning the fact that the Tories were in power for the 14 of the last 15 years, which almost certainly means that Tristan is a Tory, because if I was, I'd also be very cross that Angela Rayner keeps reminding the House that they were in power for the last 14 of the last 15 years. The reason why Daisy Cooper got to her feet was because it is the day of the deputies, and Rayner makes it look way too easy, writes James. Philp started well, then ended up sounding like a child having a tantrum. Just on one thing, this comment of Starmer's about far-right bandwagons. I thought at the time that was more about Elon Musk describing Jess Phillips as a rape genocide apologist, despite the fact that she spent 20 years working for Women's Aid, a charity dedicated to literally looking after women and children who've been victims of domestic abuse, sexual violence and human trafficking. But you were right, Aggie Chambre. You predicted that was why Chris Philp had been handed the brief today, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened.
Indeed, and I think on that comment as well, the far-right bandwagon, there are people in the government who think that was not a smart thing to say, but he has tried to explain what he meant a number of times then, and also recently as well, by saying he was talking specifically about politicians. He wasn't talking about survivors.
And Chris Philp knows that.
Well, they will have heard his explanation because he's made it numerous times. I think Chris Philp did okay there. I felt like all of the questions he probably could have written beforehand and didn't necessarily interact that much with Angela Rayner. There were a couple of times she didn't answer his questions and he didn't seem to pick up on it. But I thought it was okay. And as I said before we started as well, Prime Minister's questions is pretty difficult. I do wonder whether the Conservatives have forgotten who commissioned Louise Casey's report, because they keep quoting it back to the government. The government did commission it, and they are, I think, aware of what it says. So trying to kind of get them on that detail and quoting her back to them, I'm not sure is that effective, and they've kind of done it quite a lot in the last 2 days since that happened. But yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. I think in terms of Angela Rayner trying to defend Starmer's record. I thought that was fairly successful in terms of what he did when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. And on the data, I think everybody at this stage agrees with what Louise Casey said, that the data was inaccurate. When it was collected, it was only half collected, and that wasn't successful enough, really. They also both started by paying tribute to the people who lost their lives in the air crash in India too, which is, I think, the first time Angela Rayner had been in the dispatch box, which I think is why they did that there. But interesting that he did then move on to small boats. And as we kind of talked about before, Labour do have quite a bad record already on people crossing the channel on small boats. They have had, 1,500 people crossing just last week, but the Conservatives have had a pretty bad time too. It's interesting that Keir Starmer yesterday basically did admit that it's getting worse. It is a really big problem, but he said he's going to try and change the way they allow in asylum seekers and try and make it so if a country does returns deals well with the UK, then potentially they would be allowed more people allowed into the UK. But she didn't talk about that. And Defended as well said that her mission is still to rebuild Britain, which he said wasn't there. And also brought up Article 3, which is something we actually hadn't talked about beforehand. But Article 3 has been in the news because ITV did this big expose about people using Article 3, which is in the European Court of Human Rights. It's on torture and degrading punishment. And ITV did this expose which said that people were using it to stop the extradition process. And Yvette Cooper actually last night, the Home Secretary, said she had ordered an urgent review on that. But Chris Philp brought that up too. And Angela Rayner's answer, as it was on most things, really said they had 14 years of failure on the issues and they didn't do anything. Said Johnny come lately.
Johnny come lately, indeed. Quite ill-tempered, that. I thought that Rayner's response to the original question may have diffused some of the unpleasantness that Chris Philp was planning on bringing to the table. And it kind of did briefly, but then things got quite... not quite ill-mannered, but got quite testy. Do you think we've got 4 years of the two main parties competing with each other over who can sound the most negative towards immigration in general, while neither admit the necessity of immigration at relatively high levels to sustain our ageing population and our economy? It's going to be a mad few years.
I think probably unless Reform UK take a massive dip in the polls and something happens to Nigel Farage that, he resigns from politics or something. But
because he will always be there to tell even bigger immigration-related porkies than either of the two main parties can do so unprompted.
I think so. I thought it was really interesting yesterday that Sir Keir Starmer was asked what his biggest mistake in the first year of politics was, and he said that they hadn't been able to tell a good enough story about what they were trying to do, which has been a massive criticism of their government. And, if they're now taking that on and potentially going to try and tell a better story, well, maybe that would be a story that is distinct to Reform UK, but we haven't...
And the problem is, where do they tell it? Something that we've asked many times on this programme. Martin's not very happy. He says, I see you only read out the texts who think Rayner did well. OK, that's from Martin, who described himself as driving when he sent that. Let's click on... OK, let's do some more. Chris Philp did well. Rayner was shocking. That's from Martin, who described himself as driving. Wow, Angela Rayner doing the same thing as Keir Starmer, answering nothing and deflecting everything. I think Chris Phelps bust it, basically. Are we all doing the what? I don't understand that last bit. That's from Martin, who describes himself as driving. Wow, Chris Phelps, this is a bit of a revelation, isn't it? This makes the members think, what decision they made with Kemi. He is giving Angela Rayner a real lesson at the dispatch box. And that's from Martin, who describes himself as driving. And that is all the ones I could find. Apart from Tristan's, I read out Tristan's as well. There we go. So thank you to Martin. Unless there are 4 Martins who describe themselves as driving, in which case thank you to all of them. It is 12:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. OK, here is a conversation that is going to be fascinating, but which I feel somewhat unqualified to conduct. Tim Gregory is a nuclear chemist working at Sellafield and the author of a new book, Going Nuclear, How the Atom Will Save the World. And it's an absolute pleasure to see you, Tim.
Oh, thanks for the invitation.
How did you become a nuclear scientist?
I always loved science as a kid, and I guess you had to pick something. And so I did geology for my undergraduate degree, discovered the joys of geochemistry, fell in love with the lab, and then a few sideways career switches, and ended up working in a nuclear lab measuring the chemistry and the radioactivity of all sorts of interesting materials.
And what brings you to this conclusion? This is about essentially redefining the conversation about environmental challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing that brought me to science was the interest, but one of the best things about science and technology is that if we implement them properly in society, we can make the world a better place. And nuclear science is a perfect example of that, not least because it has the power to completely replace fossil fuels, which of course are causing global warming, air pollution, ocean acidification in this journey towards net zero that the UK and lots of other countries are now going on.
Yes.
Nuclear plays an important part in that, and I think that the record needs to be set straight, which is motivation for writing the book.
Yes. So what is wrong at the moment with the record? Is it an almost sort of spooky response to the word nuclear? Everybody starts worrying about...
Yeah, it's got terrible PR.
Chernobyl and animals with 17 legs and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
It's got terrible PR, and when you look at the data, it's not only the safest way to generate power, it's actually on a par with wind and solar in terms of its safety record. But it's also, by virtually every metric, the most environmentally friendly way to generate power. It doesn't emit carbon dioxide, it uses barely any land, and because of the huge amount of energy you get from a very small amount of uranium, you need barely any mining as well. And so it's an obvious replacement for fossil fuels as we try to get rid of them.
Well, scratch my slightly glib comment about animals with 17 legs. Why do you think that the PR, so to speak, remains so negative, even as the science has become close to irrefutable?
The history of nuclear power generation is a little bit like the history of aviation, right? I mean, just last week we had an aeroplane crash, horrible, and it's still in the news now. And a lot of people have a fear of flying, even though by the data, it's virtually the safest way to travel. It's far safer than a car, which is probably the most dangerous thing that most people do every day. But very few people have a fear of driving a car, and so there's this kind of meme in society that nuclear power is dangerous and it's bad for the environment. There's this pervasive,
and we can't separate it from bombs in our mind.
You can. Well, okay. So there's an unfortunate kind of a tangle between atomic weapons and nuclear power reactors, and comparing the two is a bit like comparing a tea light with a stick of dynamite.
You've used that line before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Nuclear reactors, they release their energy slowly over many years to produce the power on which peaceful society depends, and prosperous society as well.
So what you're calling for is a refocusing of priorities.
Definitely, yes. I would love to see more nuclear power, not just in the UK and across Europe, but North America and the rest of the world again.
How commonplace is your position? Because, I mean, the book is subtitled How the Atom Will Save the World. So you are coming from an evangelical position. You're evangelizing for nuclear power. Is yours a lonely position, or would most people in the sector agree that this is something that the public needs to be persuaded of?
Interestingly, there's quite a lot of public support in the UK for nuclear power, despite the meme that it's got this really fierce opposition. A YouGov poll, which I make a habit of tracking, shows that about 50% of people in the UK either strongly support or tend to support nuclear power.
That surprises me.
And only 8% strongly oppose, so it's actually a minority view. And last week, with the announcement that Sizewell C is going ahead in Suffolk and that Rolls-Royce will be deploying small modular reactors up and down the country, there's government support there as well, and private sector support. And the truth is, no country has achieved net zero. Fundamentally, it's incredibly difficult. We've only been trying to do it.
Who's winning?
It depends by what metric. France is doing pretty well.
Is it?
France built 55 nuclear reactors in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's only built one since, but all 55 of those nuclear reactors are still working, which is why France has got some of the cleanest electricity in Europe.
I didn't know.
And actually, in 2005, France got 80% of its electricity from nuclear power. It almost decarbonised its grid by accident before climate change became the hot topic that it is today. And so the science is there, and so is the precedent. We've actually done this before.
And how do you, account for the prioritisation that's currently given to wind and solar? It's not just about, because everyone kind of agrees that fossil fuels need to be phased out, everyone except Donald Trump and Nigel Farage pretty much. But you also point out in the book that solar and wind power are not as green as they're sometimes portrayed as being. You're a massive nuclear power head.
If there was something better than nuclear power, I would be advocating for that. All I want is lots of energy that's cheap and that's green. And nuclear power is our best shot at doing that.
But that involves being a little bit more negative than people committed to clean energy usually are towards wind and solar.
Yeah, for sure.
Why is that?
Well,
because they're not as green as they're portrayed to be.
No, so when you look at the relatively small amounts of power that wind turbines and solar panels generate, you need quite a lot of mining to exhume the minerals from which you make this infrastructure, and that mining footprint doesn't get diluted as much as you would think by the amount of power that they generate. But I will just add that by virtually every metric, they are more environmentally friendly than fossil fuels.
Of course, yes. I mean, it's not quite either or, but it is like a league table, if you like.
For sure, and it's very difficult to compensate for the intermittence of wind and solar. What do we do on days when the wind isn't blowing, and especially in winter when the sun isn't shining? Definitely up north where I live, it's dark all the time. You need that reliable power to jump in and support that renewable intermittence, and in the absence of fossil fuels, that means nuclear.
What about the waste? A lot of people are texting in to... In fact, let me just help you sell your book to them. Well, he'll answer all of these questions in Going Nuclear, How the Atom Will Save the World by Tim Gregory. But while we have you, I think I'm in my early 50s, so I'm older than you, and I have almost a muscle memory of nuclear waste being something that was going to be of enormous danger and harm to the world.
Yeah, for sure. It's a challenge. It's interesting when you look at the energy density of nuclear fuel, the amount of power you can get from a tiny amount of uranium. The natural conclusion of that is that you get a very small amount of waste for a huge amount of energy. And so if you generated all of your power over your entire lifetime from nuclear alone, forget renewables, forget fossil fuels, 100% nuclear powered lifetime, you couldn't even fill a wine glass with the amount of nuclear waste that you produce. It's actually not that much. As for what to do with it, because you can't just trivialise it out of existence.
No, of course.
It's radioactive for a long time. Finland last year opened the world's first and currently only geological repository for nuclear waste. So they will basically bury it. And the thing with nuclear waste, like all radioactive substances, is that they get less radioactive with time. They decay. And so in about 100,000 years, something like that, it won't be nuclear waste anymore. It will just be waste.
Okay, so you're not... I mean, and again, you're getting loads of questions, actually. I mean, it goes to show that there's a need for and some criticism. So deal with this from Fiona. Nuclear is expensive and slow to build. It needs loads of water, so will be built near rapidly rising seas and eroding coastlines, and it's vulnerable during wars. In fact, a few people have asked what happens if one gets bombed. We need to invest the money and time in tidal, solar and wind, and we need to reduce demand.
So first of all, it's going to be
You're up for this. I love this. You're absolutely buzzing. Come on,
Absolutely.
then.
The reason it takes a long time often is because we just don't do it enough. And when you look at the history of nuclear power, build times, countries that build at pace, build at scale as well. It would be a bit like if Ford only made one car a month. It would take them forever. The fact that they're constantly building them means that they do it quickly. And so when we look over to China and South Korea, build times are actually coming down.
And this is where there's a sort of global dimension to it all. But in that the more you do it, the better you get at it. So Hinkley Point C is running massively behind schedule and over budget, because it would be like asking me to start building a car now and comparing it with Ford.
For sure. I wasn't even 2 years old when Britain last connected a nuclear power station to the grid. That was Sizewell B in 1995. So it's been too long. We've lost the art and the spirit.
And how do we get it back?
Do more of it, for sure.
Is it that simple?
Yeah, I think it is. That's what the history suggests anyway. And it's not just the large kind of traditional gigawatt-style massive power stations. It's the small modular reactors as well. And this is what's new this time around. These small modular reactors, the idea is that you can build 85% of the reactor on a factory line, and just like you might assemble IKEA furniture in your flat and you transport it in the back of your car, the idea is that you can apply the same logic to nuclear reactors.
So what are the downsides
of nuclear?
Yeah.
I think the biggest downside to nuclear is that when it does overrun, it tends to get expensive. But I think... Well,
we come back to your answer to the last
question. When you look
then.
at the history of nuclear power, countries that do it at scale do it quickly and within budget as well.
You've already got some fans as well, I should make that clear. I'm so happy to be hearing this, given airtime. Nuclear is the answer in the immediate term. In 50 years' time, solar and wind might be good enough to replace it, but we're just not there yet. Nuclear is a mature technology, and we're good at building them. Get started yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. It's like the old kind of fortune cookie slip. The best time to plant a tree is yesterday.
Yes.
The second best time is today.
Martin picks on something that you addressed very directly in the book. And I love that his use of the phrase rightly or wrongly here, because it's very pertinent. Chernobyl, rightly or wrongly, is the fear. Did you coin the word radiophobia?
No, I didn't. Radiophobia is kind of out there.
But that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. Europe actually built more nuclear reactors in the 5 years leading up to Chernobyl than it's built since. And so it really is no stretch to say that it was Chernobyl that kind of put an end to nuclear power expansion in Europe. When you look at the fatalities from Chernobyl, and I don't want to diminish
you've got a chapter called "We Need to Talk About Chernobyl."
There's a whole
just to reassure Martin
yes,
that you're on top of this.
It's very sensitive because you don't want to diminish it. You don't want to trivialise it because every death. Chernobyl was avoidable ultimately.
Yes.
But when you look at the deaths from nuclear power, they are vastly diluted by the enormous amount of power you get from a single nuclear reactor. Again, it's like aviation. It's an impeccable safety record punctuated by very infrequent but very high-profile one-off events.
I salute your sensitivity. It's really, really difficult to do that because, I mean, the numbers absolutely support your position, so you're not in any way trivialising that. But the impacts of Chernobyl and Fukushima as well.
For sure.
Which I think was only one fatality at Fukushima?
That's right, yes. And it's
about 50 for Chernobyl.
It was between 30 and 40 in the immediate aftermath.
Right.
And then there were maybe something like a few hundred, maybe up to 1,000 latent cancers amongst the wider population as a consequence of Chernobyl, something like that. That's from a UN commissioned report, actually, that kind of it was written and compiled by a big consortium of scientists from multiple countries, including the countries that were affected as well. And so it's not kind of downplayed or trivialised and diminished.
And what about, and this is sadly timely, and it wasn't when you wrote the book, but we are seeing nuclear facilities being targeted by ordnance at the moment in the Middle East. What about the dangers? An awful lot of people wondering about what happens if someone tries to bomb a power plant.
Yeah, it's interesting. You could make the same argument for all sorts of public infrastructure. I mean, what if you bombed a dam, for example? As happened in the 70s in China. It wasn't bombed, but the Banqiao Dam burst and killed millions and millions of people. In a technological world, things tend to get concentrated and they can become targets of war. Interestingly, the new European power reactors designed by EDF, which is what Hinkley Point C actually is and what Sizewell C will be, are aeroplane-proof. They've been tested for aeroplanes being flying into them. So I think we're okay. Not about this.
No, absolutely. And finally, probably, Tim, because we're out of time, how do you deal with, or do you bother trying to deal with the sort of political voices that are dismissive of the need for net zero? Either climate change deniers or people who don't think that we should be searching quite so hard for alternatives to fossil fuels.
I would say that even if you don't care about net zero, or maybe even don't even believe in climate change, there are other reasons for ditching fossil fuels as well, namely air pollution and all of the land that we have to turn to mine fossil fuels. Because although I've met climate change deniers and net zero deniers, I haven't met anybody who doesn't want to see a greener world that's more prosperous and can flourish. And that's what nuclear power can give us. And so I hope that it has appeal to kind of people of all kind of political persuasions. This isn't a left-right issue. This is about as fundamental as things like clean water.
Yeah, Jimmy,
clean electricity.
You've won Jimmy over. I wish politicians answered like scientists. Informed facts over uninformed opinions. Great guest. Who's the book for?
This is for people who want to live in a more prosperous world, a cleaner world, and are perhaps a little bit curious or want to have a second think about nuclear power. You might be surprised. And I certainly felt more optimistic about net zero after writing this book than I did before. I used to think it probably wasn't even possible, but now roll on net zero by 2050, absolutely.
Right, we'll get you back. We'll get you back to mark your homework. Tim Gregory, thanks ever so much. Going nuclear, How the Atom Will Save the World is out now, and you're off back to Sellafield, are you?
I am, yeah.
Bon voyage. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10-1 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. One of the only, I was going to say one of the biggest, but arguably one of the only success stories in recent years regarding what we could refer to as traditional media was the New European newspaper, which you've heard me mention many times on this programme, and which grew really from the ashes of Brexit, as a phoenix-like, rising from the ashes of Brexit to acknowledge the fact that we had made a terrible mistake, but also that the conversation in many ways needed to continue. But, 8-9 years on, what would that conversation look like? The founder and editor of the New European, Matt Kelly, is with me now because it's all change at the pumps.
It is. Well, I think the truth is it had been changing for quite a long time, and that we'd outgrown in some ways the name, and we've rebranded to the New World. Because we felt that, well, I'll tell you the brief story. I was having a conversation with one of my investors, and he said, look, you set out to do 4 issues.
Well, that was my next question. Well, remind us what the original plan was.
Well, the plan was to do 4 issues. We called it Pop-Up Publishing. We did it 9 days after the referendum. So there was this burst of energy, and people liked it. And we grew and grew and grew. And this week, I think it's issue 440 that we've published. But the investor said to me, he said, look, you got all these amazing writers, you cover everything, philosophy, science, China, America, obviously, Russia, everything that's going on. He said, you're not the New European, you're the New World.
Oh, yeah.
And when he said it, a sort of light bulb went off in my head, because I'd been looking for the next chapter. I've been looking for... We've grown faster than any publication in the UK for the last 4 years. So we've now got 35,000 subscribers, and they're all proper paying subscribers, not giveaways. And we've grown consistently 25% year on year in the last 4 years since we took the company.
I mean, this is unheard of.
It's an anomaly.
Media. Yes,
it's an anomaly. And I did think, there's clearly an appetite for what we're doing. And what we are doing is trying to present, as you are, James, I think, trying to present an alternative to the kind of corrosive nationalism that seems endemic now through all media, and is setting the agenda from right-wing media, and it's filtering its way up through radio and television, with rare exceptions like this. And I wanted to be a rare exception. And so we set out to create a platform for an alternative view, where we were discussing progressive ideas. So it's not mired in this idea that, there's huge scarcity and we've got to defend our borders and there's not enough to go around, so watch out for who wants to nick your biscuits and all of this stuff. There can be more, there can be an alternative, progressive future. And we wanted it to be an exploration of ideas about how that would be. Like your fantastic last guest.
Yeah, he was great,
who I've just signed up.
I know you do. You're shameless. You signed him up in the green room to go and write an article for the New World.
As we were crossing, I said, mate, you've got to write for us, because this is what we're all about. Yes. It's about exploring alternative ideas and having the debate in a kind of open-minded way. Now, there's no question Brexit is still absolutely central.
But you don't relitigate it.
We're not. So there did come a point where, and there are people.
God help us. God save us from people who relitigate Brexit.
I know, but we've done our fair share of relitigating and looking back. Sure. But I do think at some point you've got to look forward. We're not going to go back just as easily as flicking a switch. So now we've got to craft the argument for, well, how do we get closer? What are the institutions we can get into? How does Europe have to reform as well, so that a new thing can emerge and Britain can play its proper part in Europe, as we should do. But I think, as Matthew Dancona, who's one of our great journalists, said, Brexit was patient zero and it has spread worldwide, that infection. And we want to call it out wherever we see it. So hence the New World.
These are the sort of engines of prejudice and misinformation that drove the vote, is what you're referring to. Those engines are spreading worldwide because, of course, as you'd have seen this week, the polling on how popular the European Union is among people still in it has never actually been higher.
Yes.
It's our gift to the world, is showing them what leaving looks like.
Mate, I mean, I've spent time on the continent, as you have, and one thing is striking, how little they care, actually, that we've left.
Very right.
And if we think that they're all sitting there obsessing about how the UK is getting on, they're not. But two, it's an absolute given. I asked a German politician in Berlin, I said, is it feasible that Germany would ever do a Grexit, whatever? He said, it's absolutely ridiculous. It'd be like saying, let's do without water. It is just the way we are. It's the way we live. And I think a lot of people still feel that, and it's still an attainable goal but it's in the distance, and we've got to work our way towards it rather than just harking back to 2016 all the time.
So you're keeping the popular columnists, the people who made the New European what it was, but the New World will cast its net a little wider.
Yeah, so we've got there's a great guy called Moises Naim, who may not be familiar to a lot of readers, but he wrote an amazing book called The Revenge of Power. And Moises is going to be a contributing editor. He's just written a brilliant piece for us about Trump. Sonia Soda, who used to be the chief leader writer for The Observer, she's joined us as a contributing editor. Tom Baldwin, who was Keir Starmer's biographer. So we're still, and then all the others. We've Alistair Campbell, Matthew D'Ancona, I mentioned James Ball, Marie Leconte. So we've got lots.
Big fan of Marie's.
Absolutely
it's a
fantastic.
Lovely signing that. She's got such a beautiful way of just with words.
Amazing. And she writes a column for us called Dilettante, which I think is the perfect name for a column by Marie. But it's and then we've got we're the only paper that starts with a philosophy column on page 2. Nigel Warburton, philosopher at large.
My dad used to joke about there being no job opportunities for people with philosophy degrees. It's a shame you weren't around back then. Yeah. I could have shown him page 2 of the magazine. I won't betray any confidences, but I was socialising on Saturday night with people who, like both of us, had their roots on Fleet Street. Although I noticed Richard Littlejohn described me yesterday as a failed Fleet Street journalist, so I don't know if I can
the failed LBC presenter.
Well, that would be the same. Yes, I was showbiz editor of the Daily Express when I left Fleet Street.
You had a decent career, mate.
It's only about 2 jobs higher than that, isn't there, in the great... But I was with old newspaper people on Saturday night, and we all now work outside newspapers. And somebody said... something that you'll appreciate. They said, I still love a flat plan.
Yeah.
I still love a flat plan, and you're still getting ink on your fingers.
It's such a joy. It's a weekly print magazine, come out on sale on Thursdays, and subscribers get it on the Wednesday. And of course, it's online as well. You cannot deny the digital future, but people definitely love getting the paper, dropping through the letterbox. And I keep saying, some people say, sometimes I don't have time to read it, but when it drops through the letterbox, it's a little flicker of hope that, the other side is still there fighting and kicking.
And it reaches parts that other papers cannot reach, or do not reach, and choose not to reach. There's always something interesting to read in it. Always.
I want it to be more interesting than it is important, but I want it to be important too.
I like that. What's the website?
It's thenewworld.co.uk.
The newworld.co.uk, and of course it should be. And if you're in Smiths, you're at
in Smiths, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, all usual suspects, better news agents, as they say.
You'll come back in about 10 years' time to tell us about the launch of the new universe.
The new cosmos.
The new cosmos.
I've already bought the
new solar system. Matt Kelly, always a pleasure. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
The New World, as you've heard, is available either by subscription or online, or indeed from all reputable news agents. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the new LBC app, where you can read and watch the latest from LBC. Put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.